Donkey Kong Bananza was first revealed in the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct earlier this year, and it was the final reveal of that presentation. And upon its initial reveal, I wasn't too excited for it. There were a variety of different reactions to this initial reveal. A lot of people were extremely excited for it, saying that it looked absolutely fantastic and couldn't wait to get their hands on a new Donkey Kong 3D platformer for the first time in almost 25 years, while others were disappointed and upset about the fact that it wasn't a new 3D Mario game when the last 3D Mario game released back in 2017, like 8 years ago. I, however, was one of those weirdos who was upset that it wasn't a new Donkey Kong Country game. This initial reveal trailer didn't exactly do it for me. I wasn't a big fan of the art direction the game was going for. I wasn't a big fan of how open and empty the levels felt. The destruction mechanics, while they looked cool, looked like they would get stale as the game progressed, and I wasn't exactly too excited for its release overall. Also, the game featured the new Donkey Kong design, which, as I mentioned previously, I wasn't a big fan of. All of these things stacked on top of each other made me cautiously optimistic for Donkey Kong Bananza at best, and really nervous for it at worst. Wait a minute, this is almost identical to my initial impressions on the Mario Wonder reveal trailer. Huh. So now that Donkey Kong Bananza has officially released, the question remains, will it be a smash hit that demolishes new records, or will it all come crumbling down? Hey, I'm Avert, and welcome to Avert Radar, a series where I talk about things that have just come out, or haven't just come out. Today on the radar, we're going to be looking at Donkey Kong Bananza, the latest 3D platforming adventure made by a chunk of the team that made Super Mario Odyssey. And to answer that question I just posed, is it good? You can tell it's good because I literally cannot resist the urge to just pick up my Switch 2 and start punching everything right now as we speak. So I'm just going to make this intro nice and short. I'm going to make it nice and concise because I need to go punch some things. Alright, I need to punch every last wall in this game. Why am I not doing that right now? So without further ado, let's stop monkeying around and let's get down to some serious monkey business. So, yeah, let's just get into it. So my first experience with Donkey Kong Bananza upon booting it up for the first time, I imagine is pretty similar to most people. I booted the game up, watched the opening cutscene, smashed through this rock here, and then immediately got thrown right into the gameplay. And then I made the silly little mistake of pushing the Y button. Because you see, the Y button in Donkey Kong Bananza is the punch button, and almost everything in the environment is destructible. The second I pushed the Y button and destroyed that chunk of rock, it was over from there. I immediately spent like at least 45 minutes just smashing every last bit of stone in this opening area. The core gameplay loop of Donkey Kong Bananza proves to be extremely addicting the instant you start the game. Destroying every last chunk of the environment is so satisfying, especially since the game constantly rewards you with different gold and other items and collectibles and stuff. In this opening area, every time I told myself to just stop punching the walls and actually continue with the main story, I would end up finding some new hidden thing that instantly demanded my attention. Donkey Kong Bananza does an exquisite job at rewarding your exploration. Anywhere you go, there will be something to find in the walls. I would try to keep going forward, but then all of a sudden, oh, there's something over here. What's behind this wall? You punch through it. Oh, there's a hidden area over here. Okay, cool. You punch down, you go into this completely different section. I was absolutely taken aback by just how extensive this seemingly small area truly was. Such a good opening tutorial area. It gets you right into the main gameplay. The main draw of Donkey Kong Bananza that separates it from other 3D platformers is the fact that you can destroy almost all of the terrain around you. And initially, this was a cause of concern for me and many others, because if you can destroy all of the terrain, then wouldn't that ruin the level design? How would the level design accommodate the fact that you can just destroy the level? But this game's level design is smart enough to get around this issue, because not all of the environment is destructible. All of the destructible terrain is sitting on top of a bottom layer that is indestructible. So even if you were to completely level the entire, level, you would still have a bottom level to it. So the areas in the game never become unplayable because you destroyed too much of the environment. And if you ever are unsatisfied with how the current level geometry is all laid out, then you can always reset it in the map screen. And speaking of the map screen, instead of having the normal standard flat map that Super Mario Odyssey had, Donkey Kong Bananza instead opts for this completely 3D map that renders the level in real time. The map in Super Mario Odyssey worked for that game, but this 3D map in Bananza works a lot lot better for Bananza when you're going to be constantly digging underground and all of the terrain that you destroy in a level is reflected on the map itself. While you're digging around everywhere, you may stumble into a randomly generated treasure chest which will show a location of a collectible on your map. And Donkey Kong has an arsenal of moves at his disposal to do so. There are so many different ways to destroy the terrain in this game. You can push the Y button to do a standard punch, which works fine enough whenever you're clearing out like really soft terrain like dirt or whatever. You can also punch up using the X button and punch down using the B button. Now, I've seen a lot of mixed opinions on the punching up and punching down controls in this game, because a lot of people when playing 3D platformers will use the B button to jump, and in Donkey Kong Bananza, using the B button won't make you jump, it'll make you punch through the ground. I personally really like this design decision, and I think it works really intuitively, as it makes sense that the X button, being the button at the top, would be the button that you push in order to punch upwards, whereas the B button is on the bottom, so you'd use it to punch downwards. However, I'm someone who uses the A button to jump in 3D platformers normally, so it's a lot easier for me to get a hang of this mechanic compared to someone who uses the B button normally. And apparently this design decision was thought up by Shigeru Miyamoto once testing the game. It's nice to see Shigeru Miyamoto test a Donkey Kong game and come up with an idea that isn't utter ass. Thankfully, for those who don't quite vibe with the controls of punching up and down, you can swap the A and B button in the options menu so that the A button punches down, whereas the B button jumps like you'd usually use. Pushing the R button will engage the hand clap, which not only collects any collectibles nearby, but also acts as a sonar, which shows you the location of collectibles that are obscured by walls and whatnot. And the L button makes Donkey Kong whistle, which also shows you the location of collectibles. Punching isn't the only method of destroying terrain that you can deploy. No, Donkey Kong can literally just rip a chunk of the terrain and use that to destroy more terrain, which is much more efficient. When you rip out a chunk of terrain, you can also throw it at enemies. You can jump mid-air while holding a chunk to do a double jump, and if you wish, you can literally start surfing on a chunk, which functions pretty similarly to the shield surfing from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Also, speaking of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I want to just quickly mention how much more adept Donkey Kong in this game is at movement than Link is in those games. Like, Link over here can barely climb a tree without getting tired and falling off. Meanwhile, my man Donkey Kong can climb an entire mountain, no sweat. Link can barely even climb when there's like a sneeze of rain outside. Meanwhile, Donkey Kong can climb in the rain with no issues whatsoever. Link literally has a stamina meter for almost every single thing he does. Meanwhile, this big ass ape doesn't. Like, seriously, Donkey Kong doesn't even need 2 hands and 2 feet to climb. He can climb with 2 feet while holding a chunk. Like, Link, can you do this? No, Link cannot do this. This is why Donkey Kong is superior to Link. Yeah. Oh yeah, and he's also superior to Sonic too, since he can do the roll that he does or whatever. And once you combine these movement options together, you get to really start cooking. If you punch while doing a roll in midair, it extends your roll out a little bit. And since the roll jump from Donkey Kong Country has been brought back, you can do the roll jump into a roll in midair and then punch to extend your distance out. In Super Mario Odyssey, the main movement tech was the fact that you could dive in midair while throwing Cappy. So you could jump, throw Cappy, dive onto Cappy, and then jump, throw your hat, and dive again, which is what people would use to get distance. Donkey Kong Bananza's equivalent of this is to grab a chunk and then do a turf surf in midair, cancel the turf surf, and then do a double jump with the same chunk, and then roll in midair while punching to extend your distance. Donkey Kong Bananza also does a good job of never restricting your movement a whole lot. As I mentioned previously, Donkey Kong can climb while holding a chunk. You don't have to worry about not being able to climb while carrying anything. And while holding onto a wall, you can still aim and throw. The hand clap is a really useful move, and you may be wondering, how exactly do you use the hand clap while you're like holding onto something above? Well, Donkey Kong just claps with his feet. Also, you can still roll while hanging onto the ceiling. I have no idea how this works, but I mean, hey, it's useful, so I'm not complaining. At first, it may not seem as if Donkey Kong Bananza is as complex with its movement as Super Mario Odyssey was, but I honestly think there's a good argument to be made that Bananza is pretty much equal in terms of Mario Odyssey when it comes to movement. A lot of people just don't seem to understand what Donkey Kong Bananza's movement mechanics are capable of once they're fully utilized. So those are the core movement mechanics, and you're going to be using those to get collectibles throughout the game. And the game features a wide variety of different collectibles. Of course, you got the Banandium gems, which are the main collectibles you'll get, which are pretty much just this game's version of the moons from Odyssey. They even look pretty similar. There are 1,000 of these things sprinkled throughout the game, and once you punch it 3 times, you'll collect it and it'll go, "Oh, banana." Oh, banana. That voice clip literally never gets old, no matter how many times I hear it. Other collectibles include Banandium chips, which you can find all around the levels, and these can be used to buy Banandium gems. You got these fossils, which are this game's equivalent of the purple coins from Mario Odyssey, in which every single layer has their own variant of the fossils, and they're only usable in each layer's specific shop. And finally, you got Banandium gold, which is literally everywhere. Banandium gold is in the walls, it's in the floors, it's in the ceilings, it's all over the place, okay? There's Banandium gold, like, between the couch cushions, behind the door, the back seat of the car, everywhere. I swear there's probably more Banandium gold in this game than there are grains of sand on the beach. And it is extremely addicting just to find all these collectibles in the environment. I think it is pure genius to combine this environmental destruction mechanic with a collectathon, because every time you punch a wall, there's always this excitement of what's going to be in the wall, what am I going to find, and it always rewards your exploration every time. There's a reason as to why I spent so much time in the opening area just punching all of the gold, because it's so beyond satisfying and cathartic to just collect immense amounts of random collectibles while punching your way through everything. And this core gameplay loop of punching your way through all of these levels to find all these collectibles just never got old all the way till the very end of the game. And now, this is going to sound extremely corny, and that's because it is, but Donkey Kong Bananza truly makes you feel like Donkey Kong. The game just takes us right back to our primitive state, back when we were like banging sticks and rocks together. Everything is just so like monkey brain. Like, ooh, what's over here? Oh, shiny. We must punch more rock to find more shiny. Ooh, there's shiny over here too. Me need more shiny. Ooga booga. There are different items you can get, like apple juice, which refills your health to full whenever you die, and melon juice, which refills your Banandium meter, which I might as well get into that now. So one of the main features of Donkey Kong Bananza are, well, the Bananzas. The Bananzas are pretty much the Donkey Kong equivalent of the Supersonic mode from Sonic, where you become Super Donkey Kong. All of these Bananza forms are different animals that Donkey Kong can turn into for a set amount of time, which makes them extremely powerful, and they all have unique attributes, which makes them all worthwhile. So let's just plow our way through all these, shall we? The first Bananza form is the Kong Bananza, which is pretty much just Donkey Kong if he went Super Saiyan. All it really does is just make you stronger. You can punch things more effectively, you do a lot more damage, and also you can do a charge punch by holding the punch button for a bit. This is by far the most simple of all the Bananza forms, but it's also just pure dumb fun. It is so satisfying to just level an entire hill using this Bananza form. The way these Bananza forms work is that you have this meter here, which functions as a time limit, and gathering Banandium gold will increase your time limit. And the thing about this is, since the Kong Bananza is so good at breaking things, and breaking things leads to a lot of gold, well, you are more than likely going to end up refilling your entire meter within like 10 seconds of using the Kong Bananza form. Anyway, the next Bananza form is the Zebra Bananza. The Zebra Bananza allows you to run at Mach speed. You can also do a charge dash, which lets you run extremely fast at the loss of some control. The Zebra Bananza is a lot more situational than the Kong Bananza is. Like, the Kong Bananza could be used in literally any layer. There's never a point in which the Kong Bananza isn't useful for something, whereas the Zebra Bananza you're only going to use specifically when you need to run fast, which, I mean, hey, it makes it easier to traverse the environment, but I don't find myself using this unless I absolutely have to most of the time. The next Bananza form is a lot more useful, and that is the Ostrich Bananza. The Ostrich Bananza allows you to fly, and wait a minute, since when can ostriches fly? Jinx, Pauline, you owe me a root beer. But yeah, it should be immediately obvious how being able to fly would be a useful ability a lot of the time. I shouldn't have to go into any more detail than that. Then we get to the best Bananza form in the game, and that is the Elephant Bananza. Why is it the best Bananza form in the game, you ask? Well, I mean, just look at this. The Elephant Bananza in this game is literally if the Luigi's Mansion 3 Ultra Super Omega Giga Suckage were an actual ability that you can just whip out whenever. And it is so beyond satisfying to just inhale the entire environment. And, oh wait, I guess this makes DK better than Kirby and Luigi as well. and the environment that you inhale turns into chunks that go into storage that you can end up throwing. Easily the best out of all the Bananza forms. And finally, we go from the best Bananza form to my least favorite Bananza form. I'm not a huge fan of the Snake Bananza. It controls about the same as Rattly did in Donkey Kong Country 2, which I also wasn't the biggest fan of. The Snake Bananza form allows you to jump much higher than you usually can, which is nice. However, it also makes you move quite a bit slower in the air, which I'm not really a big fan of, considering most of the time I'm moving in this game, I'm in the air. But you also get this glare move, which slows everything in the environment down for a bit. The Snake Bananza isn't horrible or anything. It definitely has its uses. It is overall more useful than it's not. I just don't really like playing as the snake, and I don't do it for extended periods of time. I usually just activate it to jump up somewhere high and then immediately deactivate it right after. A good feature with these Bananza forms is the fact that you can instantly switch between them on the fly once you activate them. Like once you activate a Bananza form, you don't have to deactivate it to go to a different Bananza form. You can just use the D-pad to instantly switch between them, which leads to some cool combinations like using the Snake Bananza to jump really high up and then switching to the Ostrich to fly in the air. I do quite like the Bananza forms, however, sometimes it could feel as if they're a little bit too overpowered. They make what is already not too difficult of a game significantly easier. And I know the common retort to that is that you don't have to use the Bananza forms if you don't want to. They're entirely optional. However, there are a lot of points in which the game intends for you to use them, and it's kind of hard not to when they're so readily accessible. That being said, I do quite like these Bananza forms. I think they are much more of a net positive on the game than they are a negative. So I've covered pretty much everything regarding the core gameplay of Donkey Kong Bananza. Now I want to go layer by layer and discuss the actual levels of the game themselves. So the first level you're going to be playing in is the Ingot Isle Cave-In, which I've already mentioned earlier is a really good tutorial area. Just immediately, the second the game starts, you're instantly thrown into an all-you-can-smash buffet, and while you're punching everything in sight, the game is tutorializing you on how the gameplay works. Eventually you make it to this bigger area with all these monkeys, and there's this like little platforming segment to get to the top here. As a layer by itself, the Ingot Isle Cave-In isn't exactly like the best, but I'd say it does a pretty good job of tutorializing you and getting you introduced to the game and its mechanics. Then once you get to the top, you jump down this giant pit and oh my god guys, look! It's Tears of the Kingdom! Look! Guy falling from sky while looking at level is Tears of the Kingdom confirmed. Anyway, the area that you crash land into is the Lagoon layer, which is the first real layer of the game. And a pretty good first layer if I do say so myself. The atmosphere is so bright and bubbly and it looks really unique too. You don't really see anything that looks like this in Mario Odyssey. From a gameplay standpoint, it's really fun to just dig around immediately and look for collectibles. The top layer teaches you some new mechanics, but then you get to another sub-layer. Sub-layers are pretty much just different levels to a layer. And the way that the Lagoon layer uses the sub-layers is actually pretty clever. So on the top sub-layer, you have these like reservoirs of water that are all stuck and should be flowing down to the bottom sub-layer, and the bottom sub-layer has a really low water level so you can't access certain areas. And the solution here is on the bottom sub-layer, you have to throw bombs at these pillars to blow them up, which destroys these plugs that are blocking the flow of the water. And every time you destroy one of these, the water starts flowing and the water level on the bottom sub-layer gets a bit higher so you can access new areas. But on top of that, there's also some areas on the bottom sub-layer that you can only get to by falling down a certain part of the top sub-layer. So already in the first proper layer, Bananza is already teaching you to be mindful of your surroundings and the environment and how the world ties in together. Then the layer ends off with you getting the Kong Bananza, punching your way through this area here, and then you get to the first boss of the game, but I'm not talking about the bosses yet. So the Ingot Isle Cave-In serves as a tutorial for basic movement and how to even play the game, and then the Lagoon layer serves as the first proper layer in which you learn some new mechanics, as well as putting the mechanics you've already learned into practice. The next layer in the game is not quite as interesting as the Lagoon layer, being the Hilltop layer. The Hilltop layer is the first of the smaller layers in the game, which are akin to the smaller kingdoms in Super Mario Odyssey. You know, like your Lake Kingdoms, your Lost Kingdoms, etc. The Hilltop layer is pretty much just a big open field. That description's a little bit reductive, but mostly it is just an open field. There are things to do in this field, of course. There are also things to do under the field if you break through it, and there are a bunch of challenge rooms and whatnot, but this is still one of the least interesting layers in the game. And I will admit that when I first played this game and I first got to the hilltop layer, I was a little nervous for the future layers of the game. And, all that nervousness kind of just flew out the window once I got to the canyon layer. The canyon layer is where I started to really enjoy the game. The lagoon layer was a good tutorial. The hilltop layer was fine enough, although it was pretty generic. But the canyon layer is absolutely great, and it's where I would personally say that Bananza truly begins. Such a well-designed level. There are collectibles literally everywhere, and every time you collect one, you'll see another one within eye shot of the one you just got. What you end up getting is an extremely addicting gameplay loop in which you're constantly collecting stuff and then seeing new stuff to collect and then going over there to collect something. On your way there, you see like 5 other things, and the canyon layer has so many different underground areas for you to find. It's just so good. Now, you may think that having collectibles stored away inside of the ground might get really annoying to find since they're just randomly placed. However, there are telegraphs sometimes in the walls that you can break to find something, whether it be like little indentations or whatnot. Whenever there's an underground area to discover, there's always some sort of tell for it, and even then the level isn't that big, so it's not like it's that hard or time consuming to just break through everything regardless. They brought the minecarts back in 3D, and I'll admit that they definitely could have done a lot more with these and they just didn't. There aren't really any 3D minecart platforming challenges. They're more so just a way to get from one island to the next, which is a small blemish on an otherwise great level. And also, to top it all off, you have this absolutely gorgeous skybox. I adore the lighting and colors on this upper area. And then you get into the sub-layer here, which is the Bananza Refinery, which is much more of a factory section, and it does more with the minecarts where you actually have to aim these projectiles to hit walls and whatnot. Then you go back onto the surface of the canyon layer to climb up this smokestack before heading back in to end off the layer. The canyon layer is easily my favorite layer up to this point, and it's not even close. Then you get to the divide. You know how in Mario Odyssey there were those 2 times in which you hit the proverbial fork in the road? Well, the divide is pretty much like that, but as an actual level. The main purpose of the divide is to choose which layer you're going to go to next, whether it be the snow layer or the forest layer. But there's more to the divide than just this choice. The divide has this mechanic where when you punch this pink block, it makes these blue blocks appear over here in the same spot and vice versa. Cool mechanic, but I don't think this layer utilizes it anywhere near as much as it could, and it's not used much outside of this layer either. So that's the divide. Easily one of the smallest layers in the entire game, if not the smallest. It's about the same size as the Cloud Kingdom or the Ruin Kingdom from Odyssey, but unlike there, I don't feel like there's massive wasted potential with this level since there's not really much going on to it. So now we have a fork in the road as to whether you want to go to the snow layer or the forest layer. And unlike Super Mario Odyssey, this is literally the only time in the entire game in which your paths diverge like this and you can choose which layer to go to next. But much like Odyssey, you do have to do both of these layers in order to progress. So it's not really choosing which one you want to do, it's choosing which one you want to do first. And I'm going to discuss the snow layer first because I consider that to be the next layer. It's the layer that Pauline wants to go to.
Hey, I wanted to go this way too.
It's the layer that's on the left side, so it makes sense to go from the left to the right. And finally, if you do the forest layer before the snow layer, then the fast travel screen will still show the snow layer as being above the forest layer. So yeah, it comes first. So the first of these 2 diverging paths leads you to the snow layer of the game called the freezer layer. And this layer is titled as such because of the fact that it takes place in a giant freezer. The thing about snow levels in platformers is that it's hard to make a unique one because all of the good ideas have pretty much already been used. Pretty much all of the snow environments you could use in gaming have already been used up, but then in Super Mario Galaxy, Nintendo had the idea of combining a snowy ice area with fire. That was a really good idea, but every other game started using that too, so that started getting stale as well. And now Donkey Kong Bananza also uses the fire and ice gimmick, but not until further in. The beginning section of the freezer layer is your typical snow area, but then as you get further in, you start to realize it's actually not snow at all, it's ice cream. Everything is ice cream. The snow is ice cream, this ground here is actually chocolate, there's like sprinkles everywhere, it's a really cool aesthetic. But then as you get further down into the layer, you start to notice that things are heating up a little. I know that the whole fire and ice gimmick has been used to death by this point, but I still think Bananza does it in clever ways. It's really satisfying to rip out a chunk of an icicle and use it to turf surf your way across the lava. It's satisfying to punch out a path for these ice cubes from this ice maker to follow down so that they can freeze over the lava to create a path for you. The freezer layer may not be the most interesting snow environment in a game of all time, but I think it does a lot with what it has. It's quite easily the longest layer to this point, but it doesn't really get stale as it goes on. The layer starts off with like a typical snow environment, then as you go down you get into the ice cream area with different ice cream shops, and then you get down to this like lava area. There's these ice caverns too, where everything is slippery and covered in ice and you can't climb the ice either, so you have to find a way around everything. The freezer layer is constantly hitting you with new ideas, and it is one of my personal favorite layers in this game. I definitely like it a lot more than Shiveria from Super Mario Odyssey. So next up, you get another one of my favorite layers in the game, that being the forest layer. The other layers up to this point aren't exactly environments that you associate with Donkey Kong. Like, I know that there have been snow levels in Donkey Kong Country before, but not ice cream levels. But a forest, that's somewhere that Donkey Kong feels right at home in. The forest layer starts off simple enough. You got the classic purple poison water that's in literally every forest area in gaming. You got these seed things you can throw at wood and it makes a vine bridge that you can cross. And there are thorns everywhere. Eventually you get to the star attraction of the forest layer, the Eggshell Hotel. As the name suggests, this entire hotel takes place in a giant eggshell. Just a really fun area to traverse. Since everything is made out of eggshells, you can pretty much just break your way from one room into the next. And the Eggshell Hotel is a 10-star exquisite suite, if I do say so myself. The Eggshell Hotel boasts copious rooms for your traversal. Why not spend a night in our thorny bush tunnel of doom? Take a visit to our rooftop patio with our dripped-out ostrich Elda. Why not spend some quality time in our luxurious garden, complete with these guys who want to eat your ass? And while you're here, don't forget to take a dip in our fine swimming pools of poisonous piss, all included in the magnificent Eggshell Hotel. 11 stars if I do say so myself. But on a serious note, this Eggshell Hotel is a really fun area to explore. All of the rooms are connected by like really thin walls, so you can just punch your way from one room to the next. And every room is unique from one another and they all go together really well. I just really like this area. And then you get the Ostrich Bonanza and make your way to the next sublayer. And things look like they've been better before here. The entire area is just flooded with this purple poison, and it just has a really oppressive atmosphere. You find out the reason why everything is flooded with poison is because of these little sprouts that are shooting poisonous water into, well, the water. So you have to punch all of them, and in doing so, you end up lowering the poison level. So it's kind of like you're unlocking more of the level as the layer continues. You have these bouncy things like that you can, bounce off of, and you know, it's just dumb fun. And finishing off this sublayer leads you to the final sublayer, which is by far the most oppressive one of them all. The entire atmosphere here is just pure purple. There's not a single shred of green to be found here. You can tell a real number has been done on this place. The forest layer is absolutely great, and I think it's in my top 3 favorite layers in this whole game. So much different variety in the different places you explore, and so many different mechanics. The seeds that you throw at the wood to make vine platforms are a cool enough mechanic by themselves, but then you combine that with the bouncy mechanic. The Eggshell Hotel is a really fun area to explore, and to top it all off, the atmosphere gets more oppressive the further down you get. Thumbs up from me. So after completing both the freezer layer and the forest layer, it leads you to the junction. The junction is another smaller layer, much like the divide, and all that's really here is just a bunch of optional side content, and oh my god, it's Void Kong! Most of the content in the junction is just consisted of this fight against Void Kong, which I'm gonna refrain from discussing right now because I'll discuss the bosses later. But for now, we're just gonna jump down this pit and chill out in the resort layer. The resort layer is, well, it's a resort. It's kind of like a vacation from the main game, which is nice after fighting a really strenuous boss fight against Void Kong that sends you through a bunch of different layers, which, again, I'm going to discuss more in depth later, as well as learning new story details, which I'll also discuss later. And in general, both the freezer layer and the forest layer were really big, involved, sprawling layers that were way more intricate than the other ones, so it's nice to take a step back and go to a smaller layer with the resort layer. Anyway, why. The resort layer is a beach level, so obviously Nintendo Beach level, it's gonna look absolutely stunning. I don't think it quite matches how absolutely breathtaking the visuals were on Bubble Lane in Super Mario Odyssey, especially at sunset, but the resort layer is still a feast for the eyes. And it's also a feast for Donkey Kong too. There are fruits everywhere that you can just smash open. The main centerpiece of the area is this giant watermelon, and yes, you do get to utterly annihilate that frickin' thing. The main mechanic of the resort layer are these enemies that make rainbow bridges once you punch them, and you can use this rainbow material to fly upwards as well, which is pretty neat. There really isn't a whole lot to this layer. You just platform up here to get to the top of the watermelon using these like rainbow floaty things, and then you punch your way through the watermelon and that's it. If you don't have any interest in finding all of the side stuff and secrets and whatnot, you can easily blitz through this layer in about like 2 minutes. Alright, vacation's over. Everyone wake up, time for the Tempest layer. Now your mind may have started drifting off in the resort layer. It was a nice vacation time. The Tempest layer snaps you right back to reality. Immediately, the second you enter the Tempest layer, it hits you with this stormy, rainy atmosphere. You find this tribe of elephants, and it turns out this layer is a forecasting station. Now this top area of the Tempest layer isn't exactly too interesting. It's just an area. It doesn't exactly have too many mechanics to differentiate it from the other areas. But once you start going into the sublayers, that's when it gets interesting. The first sublayer is this area with like molten lava rain, and the reason for this is because the area above has lava there, so it's dripping through the ceiling onto the lower sublayer. Just another instance of Donkey Kong Bananza giving these layers continuity, where one thing that happens in the upper layer affects the lower layers as well, so it actually feels like you're in an area going down. The way to avoid taking damage from the molten rain is by holding a chunk above your head to use as a makeshift umbrella of sorts, and you can tell which areas are safe and which ones aren't by the ones that have grass and which ones don't. And also you can use the chunks as zip lines here, and the different materials you use for chunks have different durabilities as well. Using a chunk of dirt as the zipline will deteriorate almost instantly, whereas using a chunk of stone will actually hold the entire way through, so there is some strategy involved here. Then you go down into this nice sauna here, which don't get too comfortable because you're gonna get thrown right into the storm. The final sublayer of the Tempest layer is easily the best part. This area uses the weather effects from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. However, instead of just using it as a way to annoy the ever-living hell out of you at any possible opportunity, this area instead uses it as a clever obstacle for you to dodge. And the storm here gets more intense as you progress. So it starts with these lightning strikes that target your precise coordinates. However, they take a second to actually activate, so it's really easy to avoid it if you just keep moving. But then they start to throw water into the mix. And the thing about the water is that if you happen to be anywhere in the water when the lightning strike hits it, then the entire water will become electrified and then you'll take damage. By the end of the Tempest layer, it's just absolute insanity as you're platforming from one area to the next, trying to avoid lightning strikes, and there's all this water everywhere that's getting electrified and these enemies, and it's just so good. I definitely think that the weather effect implementation works a lot better in a 3D platformer like Donkey Kong Bananza than it works in the 3D Zelda games on Switch. This final section is fantastic, and I think it saves this layer from being one of the weaker ones in the game. These next couple layers are much shorter layers, much more fillery, for lack of a better term. Starting us off, we get the landfill layer, and yup, it's a landfill alright. This entire layer is literally just digging down the layer, and there's just like trash everywhere. There's so much trash in this layer, they literally went and made a town out of it. There's really not a whole lot to the landfill layer, but I think it serves as a nice reprieve from the more hectic Tempest layer with all the weather effects and the storms and whatnot. Also, it's just extremely cathartic to whip out the elephant Bananza here and just start going but yeah, there's really not a whole lot else to say about this layer. It's just a landfill. I mean, landfiller, am I right? After the landfiller layer comes my least favorite layer in the game, and that is the racing layer. I think the racing layer is pretty much hard carried by Diddy and Dixie's appearance, and everything else is just kind of meh. It's an extremely short layer, and all it really consists of is a bunch of disconnected bonus areas and this racing mini game here with Rambi. And I'm not exactly the biggest fan of this racing game with Rambi here. It kind of just feels slow and clunky. The strategy here is you want to hit as much of the ground as you possibly can so that it builds up your little meter here, and then you can like fart out this rainbow ground to go faster, and that allows for some pretty big shortcuts, but I don't know, I just don't find this racing that engaging. I think it would have been better had they went for a more like freeform sort of control style. Something like how Epona controls in Ocarina of Time in Breath of the Wild, where you have this meter where there's like 5 times that you can slap Rambi's ass to go faster, but upon every slap, you have to wait a little bit for it to refill, and then once you use all 5 slaps, you have to wait a longer time for it to refill. As the racing minigame currently stands, I'm not the biggest fan of it, which is unfortunate considering that's the main draw of this layer, and there's not much to it other than that. So while I don't hate the racing layer or anything, it is still definitely my least favorite layer in the game, but it is nice to see Diddy and Dixie come back. Okay, so by this point in the game when I first played, I was getting a little bit burnt out around here. The resort layer wasn't the biggest layer of all time, but there that was fine because that served as a nice respite after a really climactic fight against Void Kong. But then you get to the Tempest layer, which doesn't start off that interesting, but it does get better as it goes along, but only at the end of the Tempest layer did I start to think it was a really good layer. And from there you get 2 smaller layers that don't really do a whole lot, and at this point I was just itching myself for an actual full-fledged layer in the same style as the Freezer layer or the Forest layer. And at first, the Radiance layer did not seem to be that. The Radiance layer starts with this small area that's filled with these enemies that can only be defeated once they enter the light. Then you go down to another sub-layer, and this just looks like a big, empty, open area of nothingness. The Radiance layer is similar to the Tempest layer for me in that it doesn't start off too interesting, but it gets better as it goes along, but only at the end does it start to get really good. But I will admit that the Radiance layer did not give off a good first impression for me, especially after doing a bunch of, let's say, less interesting layers before this. But I do think that the Radiance layer starts to pick up once you get to the Bananza part where you have to get the different pieces of the music disc. One of the pieces of the record requires you to slide down the wall while avoiding electricity, which I think is a really cool way of utilizing the fact that Donkey Kong can't climb certain walls. And then there's another piece which utilizes these enemies right here. You see, the Radiance layer has these 2 main enemies. There's this one, which is immune to the darkness and can only be defeated once they're brought into the light, and then there's this one that's immune to the light and can only be defeated once they're in the darkness. And this section here plays with that in a creative way, in which you have these enemies that are only vulnerable in the light, and then you have to hit them in the light and then take them into the shade, in which they are impervious to any damage. So then you ostensibly have this indestructible rock that you can just bring down these rails here without having to worry about the deterioration of other materials. And I think that is really cool. The main mechanics that the Radiance layer has are these light and shade puzzles. I haven't really discussed any of the bonus rooms in this game, and I don't plan on discussing them extensively. However, I want to direct attention to this specific bonus room right here, which I think makes really clever use of these light and dark enemies. So basically, you have these enemies that are vulnerable to the light and immune to the dark, and you have to ride them across these thorns. However, since they're vulnerable to the light, you have to stay in the shade and avoid these light sections. But that presents an issue because there's the secret alternative path to the left that's entirely covered by light, so how do you get over there? The solution is that you have to utilize these enemies later on that act the exact opposite, where they're immune to the light but vulnerable to the dark. Then you go back across the same area that you just went through, but you do it in the opposite way, where you have to stay in the light sections instead of staying in the shade. Really clever way to flip this entire concept on its head. And these shade puzzles only continue as the layer progresses. Eventually you turn on these artificial lights which act as the suns for each layer, which is a cool piece of world building that I will discuss in further detail later. But the main aspect of note here is that there are 2 of them, and hitting these switches will change which of these 2 suns are active at any given time. And having these 2 different lights at 2 different locations means that whatever one you have on will cast a shadow in a different direction. All of these mechanics come together in this final section, which is easily the best part of the entire layer. So you have this ground that's only active in the shade and disappears once the light is casted on it. While the ground is active, it's completely impervious to any punches you could throw at it. However, there's a fossil stuck in it. So the question arises, how do you get this fossil when the light doesn't cast on this piece of ground no matter which light you have active at any time? The solution to this puzzle is that you need to break this block right here that's blocking the light from casting on it, which is really smart. This concept extends even further where you have to get down this little hole right here, but it's blocked by another piece of ground that you cannot get the light to cast on no matter which sun you have activated. And the reason why you can't get the light to cast on it is because, again, you have this giant block on top of this pillar blocking the light from casting on it. So you need to bust out the snake bonanza to climb up this pillar and then break this block so you can get down. Really clever puzzles that took me a lot longer than I'm willing to admit on my first playthrough to solve. But I'm glad that Donkey Kong Bananza has a late game layer like this that has these puzzles that makes you actually need to think. I wouldn't exactly say that the Radiance layer is a highlight of Donkey Kong Bananza's layers, but this section certainly is. I just wish that the Radiance layer could start off a bit more interesting. I'm also not a big fan of the art direction this layer goes for, particularly how it looks once you light everything up and you're in the main desert area, because you see, having a desert level in a Donkey Kong game is really cool since none of the Donkey Kong Country games have a desert area, and the last time there's been a desert in a Donkey Kong game was DK64, but the problem here is that you cannot tell that this is a desert at first glance since all the sand is white and there are these blue crystals everywhere, so it ends up just looking like a snow area. A really baffling decision to make the desert layer of the game look like the snow layer. Like, I guarantee you, if you inserted music from the freezer layer into this area of the Radiance layer, it would fit right in. But yeah, still a really good layer, even if it has the same issue I have with the Tempest layer in that it doesn't start off as interesting as it could, but at least it does get more interesting as it goes on. So then Pauline and Donkey Kong share a really tender moment, and everything is just going so splendidly. The only thing I could possibly see ruining this moment is if a giant eel came from the ground and ate Pauline. But as if that's gonna happen. Well, that just happened. But at the very least, it's not like we're in jail as well or anything. Oh, god damn it! So Donkey Kong gets separated from Pauline and ends up behind bars. And the jail guards are like, hey, don't break down. So Donkey Kong ends up breaking down and we get out of the jail. And the guards kind of just don't care and let us progress anyway. Then we get into the groove layer. So basically, there's this giant speaker in the middle here that's supposed to be playing music but isn't. So then you have to go to these 3 different areas to unlock the beat, the bass, and the melody. Not the most grandiose layer of all time, but this is the first layer that you have to do without Pauline on your shoulders, so no Bananza Forms. You got this fossil museum here, which is pretty cool. Oh yeah, there's this swap harp mechanic where you can like punch this harp thing here and it can change gold to bounciness and back. Yeah, there's not really a whole lot to this layer, but I still like it for what it is. Although I am still kind of feeling the whole, really, another small layer this late into the game. But here it at least makes sense why it's a smaller layer, because you're not going to have Pauline here and you don't want to have no Pauline for a huge big layer. And also we did just get the Radiance layer, which was pretty expansive. And I don't know, I guess I just have a thing for late game Nintendo music theme floors, because the dance floor in Luigi's Mansion 3 might be my favorite floor in that entire game, and that's barely like 10 minutes long. So anyway, you find the eel that ate Pauline, you find out the eel's actually a pretty chill dude and just got possessed by Void Kong, so you're chill and you're just homies now. You go inside of the eel to break Pauline free, and then you make it to what is my favorite layer in the game, the Feast layer. And that name is very apt because we are indeed feasting here. Like in Super Mario Odyssey, I don't know for sure what my favorite kingdom in that game is. Like Metro Kingdom is probably the answer, but I don't know for sure. But in Donkey Kong Bananza, the Feast layer is my favorite layer in the entire game, and it's quite frankly not even close. The Feast layer feels like the ultimate ultimate culmination of every other layer up to this point. There is something to do around every single corner. Every time you explore the environment, your exploration is rewarded immensely. There are so many different areas in the feast layer to explore. You got this main carnival area, you got this spooky area, these different minecart roller coasters you can take, this little section where you're jumping across different potato patty french fries through this steaming hot oil grease. It's just really hard to stop playing this game once you get into this layer. The main objective of the feast layer is that this layer is prided for its giant banana burger, and in order to build it, you need to find 5 different burger switches around the level, and all of these different switches are located in different challenge areas, some of which utilize your Bananza Forms. Eventually you end up building the entire burger, you climb up the thing, and then you jump down into this factory section. A pretty big change of pace from the rest of the layer, but also a welcome one. I really like this factory section as well. This entire layer just oozes fun out of every single corner. Hidden secrets in every last nook and cranny. Just such a delectable, delicious layer. Out of all the layers in Donkey Kong Bananza, the Feast layer is the one that reminds me the most of Rareware's classic titles. Banjo-Tooie in particular, with this Witchy World level. I can't quite place my finger on why I feel like this is the most Rareware level in the game. One of the reasons I'm guessing is because there are so many different varied areas in this layer, with them having different themes and music and such. Like, for instance, when you go to this goofy spooky area and then it plays a spooky rendition of the music, and that's just such a rareism. Also, just this whole concept of finding different burger switches around the area so that you can build this giant burger, that just feels like it's right out of Banjo-Kazooie. This section here where you have to jump across these like potato patties and fries so that you could get through this really hot bubbly oil section, come on man. And then you end up going into this factory section, and I can't help but think of Grunty Industries here. You have this really goofy muck. Again, it looks plopped right out of Banjo. Like seriously, the boss of this area is called Muckety Muck. As if that isn't the most Banjo-Kazooie ass name imaginable. So that's the feast layer done, and that just leaves us with the forbidden layer, which lives up to its name because every single NPC here wants you to leave immediately. Well, I mean, unless you give them some gold. I know I mentioned earlier about these layers not really feeling like they came out of Donkey Kong Country. Well, yeah, that's amplified by a factor of about 10 with this layer. Like, look at this! Look at this screenshot without Donkey Kong in it and tell me that you would see this and immediately think, oh yeah, that's a 3D Donkey Kong game. No, you wouldn't. This isn't on par with like the Ruined Kingdom from Odyssey in terms of levels that you would never expect to see in one of these games, but it's pretty close. This layer consists of several floating islands, and there's this really cool mechanic where you can create force fields around them, where if you throw any sort of chunk, it'll create a bridge for you in the air. So we're right about the end of the layer. We just gotta break through this wall and, oh, what's this? Long ago, a surface dweller came here looking for the Banandium root. The intruder forced their way through here, but never came back out. Huh. I wonder who that's referring to. No, shh! It's forbidden. I'll cover everything beyond this point in the forbidden layer later, once I talk about the story. And yes, the Banana Monkey game has enough story to warrant discussing it. But for now that I've given my thoughts on all the layers, I want to talk about the bosses in Donkey Kong Bananza. In my Avert Radar episode on Super Mario Bros. Wonder, I stated that the worst aspect of platformers are consistently the bosses. That applied to Super Mario Odyssey, and that also applies to Donkey Kong Bananza. For the first few bosses of Bananza, I was starting to think that the bosses in this game might actually be worse than Mario Odyssey, because while the bosses in Super Mario Odyssey are the weakest aspect of that game, the game still had some key standouts in the boss department. Donkey Kong Bananza doesn't give a good first impression with its boss design in the slightest. So many of the bosses at the beginning of the game are just punching a guy until he's dead, and that's even more mindless once you have the Kong Bananza activated, in which the guy just dies instantly. The first boss in the game that kind of throws a wrench into this is once you get to the canyon layer and you have to fight Mad Mixer. And even though Mad Mixer is the best boss up to this point, that's not really saying much when the bar is kind of just a bunch of guys you punch until they're dead. And I mean, the Mad Mixer fight is decent enough. It uses the canyon layer's minecart mechanic for you to throw bombs at it while you're on this track, and occasionally you'll have to jump over these lasers. It's more involved than the other bosses in this game so far, but at this point of Super Mario Odyssey, we were getting bosses like this one in the Sand Kingdom where you have to like throw Cappy onto these punchy hands, and you have to dodge these ice blocks to punch this guy in the face, and while doing that you have to dodge these icicles and everything. I think that was a much better boss, and that happened way earlier in Mario Odyssey than this one. But then the final boss of the canyon layer is just another guy that you have to punch until he's dead. Then we get to the freezer layer, and the mid boss there is Poppy Kong, which I'll discuss the characters later, but this fight is meh. She turns invisible, but that doesn't really make it much harder. It's still pretty pathetically easy to beat her. I don't think that the bosses in Donkey Kong Bonanza get legitimately good until you get to the freezer and forest layers. The main boss of the freezer layer is Inflaminite, who looks like he got ripped directly out of a Zelda game. Basically, he rolls at you a few times, and while he does that, you gotta throw some ice at him in order to thaw him out. Or you can just wait for him to roll 3 times, and ice will fall on his head and thaw him out for you. Then you punch your way through all this rock in order to hit him once, and that's where you get to the actually interesting part of the fight, where he starts running away on these different trails of snow, and you can only run on these with the Zebra Bonanza. And after each hit, these trails get more complex to navigate, and it's actually a pretty solid idea. However, it can be easily cheesed by just punching the enemy before he can even make these trails. Like, Inflaminite isn't an incredible boss or anything, but it's a good boss, and that's more than I can say about any of the other ones so far. And the boss of the forest layer is Abracadabra, who makes these vine paths that you have to follow while avoiding these thorns and flying over this poison with the ostrich Bonanza. Again, not a great boss, but it is a good one that is more complex than the other ones in the game, for whatever that's worth. So I mentioned earlier that there's a fight against Void Kong in the junction layer, and I'll talk about this boss fight really quick, but I don't plan on talking about the actual villains as characters until later. So this fight against Void Kong has you going to several previous layers you've already been to fight him, and usually I don't like it when games make you go to previous areas for no other reason than to just pad the game out, but this time it actually works, because for one, it's not that egregious. He just makes you go to 2 different layers and that's it, and there is a fast travel to get between the layers, so it's not like you have to actually go all the way there and back over and over again. Second, the boss fight actually has new gameplay in the different layers. It's not just like you're doing the exact same thing over and over again. And also because Void Kong terrorizing other layers makes the game feel more connected, as well as giving him more presence as a villain. This is something I'll discuss in further detail later, but actually witnessing Void Kong doing these heinous activities makes him feel more like an actual villain. And then the fight concludes back in the junction where you have to just knock him right out. This boss fight is pretty solid. The game is actually starting to get some good boss fights now, which is nice. Void Kong just causes all of these utter shenanigans and chaos that you have to destroy and get around, and it is a really climactic boss fight. The boss of the Tempest layer works differently from the other bosses in the game in that it's split up into 3 different sections throughout the entire layer. The first encounter with Sinister Blusterwing takes place at the beginning of the layer, and this first phase is pretty simple. Just throw a chunk at its wings and then hit it. Then it flies away and you see it again later in the layer when you actually have the Elephant Bonanza, and then it's a little bit harder, actually doing some attacks. Then at the end of the layer you fight it one last time in this really cool shot. This boss fight isn't really longer than the other ones. It still only takes 3 hits to beat, but each hit is divided into a different section of the layer. And I have mixed feelings on arranging the boss in this manner, because on the one hand you could have absolutely just had one big fight at the end of the layer where you hit it 3 times in a row, but there is merit in having the boss laid out like this, because each phase is kind of just a test of your abilities up to that point. Where in the first phase you don't have access to the Elephant Bonanza, then in the second phase you do, and then the third phase has this really cool hype background, but it doesn't really matter too much though, because this boss is decent regardless. Then in the landfill layer there's another boss where you just have to punch it till it dies. There's a rematch against Poppy Kong, which also isn't that hard. Then there's a rematch against Grumpy Kong, and this one's barely even harder than the last fight against him, if at all. So this fight against Grumpy Kong has him using this material that's only vulnerable in the light and is completely immune to damage in the shade. And at first there aren't any sources of light here whatsoever, so you have to break these spots on the ceiling to let light come in. But after you do that, you literally just need to punch this guy until he's knocked out again. And it's not as if it's a difficult task to break these spots on the ceiling in the slightest. You literally just need to switch to the Snake Bonanza, jump up here, punch it, done. That's half of the boss completed right there. Then you just punch him till he's knocked out again. The first Grumpy fight I can excuse for being easy because it's one of the first bosses in the game. This boss is pathetically easy, and it's one of the last fights in the game. Like, by this point in Super Mario Odyssey, we were having fights like Cookatiel, which was a really creative fight that was appropriately difficult for that part of the game. There was this really good fight against the Brutals where they all went into this mech and you had to climb up it several times in new and unique ways. And there was this fight against the literal goddamn hyper-realistic dragon. Meanwhile, at this point of Donkey Kong Bananza, the boss fights are, okay, it's the guy that you had to just punch until he died before, but now you have to use the Snake Bananza to go to the ceiling, punch a hole in the ceiling, and then punch the guy to death. Wow. Thankfully, this boss in the Feast layer against Muckety Muck is really good, even though his name is Muckety Muck. This boss fight utilizes the mechanic of throwing salt at this muck to eradicate it that you've been doing for the entire layer and makes a boss out of it. This muck mastermind jumps from place to place, shooting these smaller muck guys that shoot muck at you. It's just complete muck mayhem mania. But it's all still entirely fair, and it utilizes the mechanics from the layer to make a boss that is really good and probably my favorite boss up to this point. It just sucks that the game took until the final few layers to get to this point. Overall, I would definitely say that Super Mario Odyssey was more consistently good in terms of its boss quality. However, Bananza does have higher highs, and that takes us to the Forbidden layer, and the boss here is shh, it's forbidden. I'll talk about the boss of the Forbidden layer later. But for now, I would like to spend some time drawing other comparisons between Donkey Kong Bananza and Super Mario Odyssey, because they're made by the same team and I want to see what Bananza does better than Odyssey and what it doesn't really. So I'm well aware that most people have already made these comparisons, but I still want to do it nonetheless, as I think it's entirely fair to compare Donkey Kong Bananza to Super Mario Odyssey, because a good chunk of the team that worked on Super Mario Odyssey ended up making Bananza. And I also believe it to be interesting analyzing where the team ended up improving on Bananza. So obviously there's some very surface level comparisons I can make here. Both games are 3D platformer collectathons in which you need to obtain as many collectibles as you possibly can. Both games have near 1,000 of the main collectibles that you need to get, while also featuring side collectibles like regional specific currency, for instance. Both games feature bonus areas, which are smaller, more contained challenges where you can find different collectibles inside. Both games feature vast open areas to explore, while also featuring much smaller, more compact areas as well. And in both games, obtaining the main collectible gives you a catchy jingle. I'm not here to say that Donkey Kong Bananza is literally just Super Mario Odyssey with Donkey Kong slapped on, because that's extremely reductive, but Bananza does share a lot of the same DNA as Super Mario Odyssey. You can see the Odyssey team's fingerprints all over this game. But what I'm interested in here aren't these surface level comparisons, it's diving into more detail to see how Bananza built off of the groundwork that Super Mario Odyssey laid down. So Super Mario Odyssey is a phenomenal game, but it's not without its flaws, and I think the biggest issue that I and many others had with it is how it handled the moons. Super Mario Odyssey contained 880 different moons that you can get just from exploring the areas, and with power moons that you can purchase from shops included, that number rises to a total of 999 moons in the game, and a solid chunk of these moons are just haphazardly strewn about these levels without much thought or consideration as to their locations. But that's not the main issue with them. You see, power moons in Super Mario Odyssey are used to power up the Odyssey, which is your main ship that you use for traversal between these different kingdoms. And in every kingdom, you need to have a certain amount of moons in order to get the Odyssey to function and move you to the next kingdom. So in every kingdom, there is a requisite number of moons that you must collect in order to progress. The problem here is that Super Mario Odyssey's kingdoms contain a lot more moons than are required to get to the next kingdom. And there is absolutely zero incentive to collect any more power moons than you need. Well, unless of course you're a completionist like me who gets off on seeing these collection lists entirely full. Once you obtain the requisite amount of power moons that you need to progress to the next level, there is absolutely zero reason to get any more beyond that. And all of the power moons that you obtain are exclusive to the kingdom you got them in. You can't use power moons from one kingdom to power the Odyssey in a different one. It doesn't work. This is what I would consider to be the biggest issue with Super Mario Odyssey. Donkey Kong Bananza, however, entirely alleviates this issue. For one, in Donkey Kong Bananza, you don't need to get a single Banandium gem in order to progress. There are no requirements on how many you need to get in a given layer in order to get to the next one. You can get to the next layer without getting a single banana. Hell, you can beat the entire game without getting a single banana, which I have done. So you may be wondering to yourself, well, if you don't need to get any Banandium gems to progress, then what's even the point of getting any Banandium gems at all? And that's where Bananza busts out the absolutely genius addition of the skill tree. The skill tree in Donkey Kong Bananza might be the single best addition that they made to this game. The way it works is every time you get 5 Banandium gems, you get a skill point, and you can use these skill points to upgrade Donkey Kong's abilities. And these are any 5 Banandium gems. They're not region locked, they're not exclusive to each layer. Any 5 Banandium gems you get in the game goes towards these skill points. This immediately fixes Super Mario Odyssey's biggest problem in one fell swoop, because now every last Banandium gem in the game is useful. There is incentive to get as many bananas as you possibly can. And this skill tree is pretty in depth too, doing everything from giving you more health, making your punch power stronger, making your sonar better so you can detect collectibles from further away, giving you entirely new abilities altogether, and you can even upgrade all of your Bananza Forms as well. And that's just barely scratching the surface of everything this skill tree gets for you. I can talk about everything else, but I don't really want to go into detail on every last little skill tree enhancement. The skill tree is an absolutely phenomenal addition to Donkey Kong Bananza, and I cannot sing its praises enough. And it is a mechanic that I want to see return in every 3D platformer Nintendo makes going forward. I imagine Mario Odyssey's issue with the moons would be fixed if that game had a skill tree system. Imagine every time you get 5 power moons, Mario could like throw his hat further maybe, you could have higher jumps, you could have better ground pound, something like that. Another issue I had with Super Mario Odyssey was regarding the purple coins. You see, every kingdom in Super Mario Odyssey had their own variation of the purple coins, which was currency that was region locked to that specific area, and these could be used on top of the normal coins, which could be used anywhere. Now my issue with these things aren't the fact that they exist. I do like having 2 different types of currency. It was the fact that at a certain point, there was no way of knowing where the final purple coins in a kingdom were. I'm sure you've also encountered this same experience. You're in, say, I don't know, Metro Kingdom, and there's 100 purple coins there, and you've gotten 97 of them, and you have absolutely zero clue where the remaining 3 purple coins are. Like seriously, where are these things? Are they over here? Are they over there? Are they under the couch cushions? And Mario Odyssey didn't have any way to see the location of the remaining purple coins you're missing in the same way that you could do with the power moons. Oh, I'm sorry. You could see the location of the remaining purple coins if you bought the Wedding Bowser amiibo. That's right, the basic feature of being able to see the remaining purple coin locations was locked behind the Wedding Bowser amiibo, which I think may have marked the beginning of Nintendo locking basic quality of life features, or otherwise just stuff that should have been available in the main game behind a paywalled piece of plastic. Thankfully, however, Donkey Kong Bananza is here to the rescue to fix this issue. You see, Bananza also has its own regional currency in these fossils, and even just by themselves, I vastly prefer these to the purple coins in Odyssey. For one, all of the fossils are inside of the ground or in a wall or on the ceiling, so you always have to break them out of wherever they're in, and that's really satisfying to do. I really like the sound effect that plays whenever you get one of these, especially on these rare fossils. And also, all of these fossils are living creatures, which allows for a lot of references to previous characters from the Donkey Kong Country series, like various different enemies and also these animal buddies. And wait, hold on a sec, whoa. If fossils are these dead characters, does that imply that the animal buddies are canonically dead? Wait a minute, how are there 10 different checkpoint pigs? Everything I knew was a lie! I didn't realize they cloned you, Professor Chops! Okay, but for real though, it is cool to see all of these different character references, although I would have liked to see more returns and some Tropical Freeze representation. As of right now, the only character from either of those 2 games that are represented in Bananza at all is Professor Chops on these different fossils, and it would have been nice to see maybe some of the Tiki Tak tribe or the Snowmads, especially since some of these smaller layers simply use alternate colors of already existing fossil designs that have been used already, but I digress. Another thing I like about these fossils is the fact that there are 3 different types of them in almost every layer. You got the common ones, which live up to their name considering how many of these things there are. You got the rare ones, and I believe there are 10 of these in every layer that they appear in. And then you have these extra rare ones, and every layer that has these only has 1 of them, and it is colossal. Excavating these things is a whole process. I think having 3 different types of this unique currency is really cool. But the main improvement to the fossils over Super Mario Odyssey's purple coins is the fact that the game actually does give you a way to track where these things are in-game, and that is by these randomly generating treasure chests I mentioned earlier on that give you a map that shows any fossil's precise coordinates on your map. Not only is the regional currency an improvement in Bananza, but also what you spend it on is an improvement as well. Both Super Mario Odyssey and Donkey Kong Bananza feature these costumes that you can buy at the shop. The difference between them is that the costumes in Odyssey were entirely superficial and only there for cosmetic purposes. The only use they had outside of that was that sometimes there was a secret area that you can only access when you wear a specific costume. Whereas the costumes in Bananza actually net you some gameplay benefits. Much like the skill tree, this is another really good addition that I would not have expected Nintendo to do. The costumes in Odyssey being entirely cosmetic wasn't even an issue I had with that game, but I do still vastly prefer the costumes having perks that can benefit you in the area you got them in. Super Mario Odyssey featured a couple tiny kingdoms that I feel had a lot of wasted potential, namely the Cloud Kingdom and the Ruined Kingdom. The Cloud Kingdom is absolutely gorgeous and is only used for a boss arena, but I think that the real wasted potential lied in the Ruined Kingdom, which was such a visually unique area for a Mario game. Like, you would never expect an area like this in a Mario game. This is something straight out of Dark Souls, but all that it was really used for was this small area here, a boss fight, and then this platforming section that literally could have been slapped into any other kingdom in the game. Donkey Kong Bananza, however, uses almost all of its layers to their full potential. The only 2 tiny layers are the Divide and the Junction, which, I mean, I don't think they had much potential to waste. Another major issue that people had with Super Mario Odyssey was its main cast of villains, being the Brutals. Upon their initial reveal, the Brutals were received pretty well, but that's just because of the fact that people were feeling a lot of fatigue from the Koopalings being shoved into almost every mainline Mario game up to that point. Like in the early 2010s especially, it was getting pretty ridiculous how many Mario games crammed the Koopalings in there somewhere. So seeing that the new big 3D Mario game featured an entirely new, unique set of enemies instead of just the Koopalings again was really refreshing. However, the Brutals ended up being rather uninteresting, unmemorable villains. Like, seriously, even if you are a huge Super Mario Odyssey fan, I still think that there is a pretty high likelihood that you don't remember all of these guys' names. I can't even remember all of them. Like, one of them is named Rango, I'm pretty sure. I think this guy might be like Larry or something. Doesn't matter. The point is, the Brutals were pretty disappointing as the main villains of Odyssey. And Donkey Kong Bananza's cast of villains is infinitely better. There are only 3 of them, and all of them work for the Void Company, which is an extremely powerful mining company. The most powerful on the entire planet, apparently. With the Brutals, there's not much you can discern from these guys at a cursory glance. You look at them and you're like, yeah, they're just a bunch of rabbits. I don't really know what their personality is just by looking at them. But upon first seeing the Void Company trio, you can immediately discern what their personalities are just from their character designs alone. And this opening cutscene introducing all of them does an extremely good job at getting you acquainted with who they are. First up is the leader of the bunch, Void Kong, who runs the Void Company. Within the first few seconds of this guy opening his mouth, you can immediately discern that he is very belligerent, greedy, self-centered, arrogant, and entitled. To his right is Poppy Kong, who is the brains of the operation, and she handles the business aspect of things. And immediately after being introduced to her, you can tell that she's a lot more calm and collected and reasonable, and tries to get her words through very carefully, in an exact polar opposite manner to that of Void Kong. Before she starts speaking, she clears her throat and says her words very deliberately, but then Void Kong ends up cutting her off, and upon doing so, you can see her facial reaction of like, "Oh, this again? How many times is this utter buffoon gonna cut me off?" Just from these characters' facial expressions, you can tell their entire dynamic, and the final of the 3 is Grumpy Kong, who is the brawn of the group and has a passion for construction. Again, you can discern almost his entire character from his appearance alone. You get the impression that Grumpy Kong doesn't really care too much about Void Co as a company. He just likes that it gives him an outlet to build things, and build things he does. Throughout the different layers, you can see different statues that are carved out by him, and in general, this company leaves their mark in every layer. In Mario Odyssey, most people probably just forget the Brutals exist the second they're off the screen. However, Voidco makes sure that its presence is always known. In just about every layer in Bananza, Void Kong's iconography is absolutely everywhere. His branding is all over the place. He's causing ruckuses in like every layer. Void Kong's presence is always felt in Donkey Kong Bananza, even when he's not on the screen. You always get the feeling that he's just 2 steps ahead of you at every turn. Every layer that you're entering for the first time, Void Kong literally just left. And it also helps a lot that you have this mini boss against him where you can actually see him doing these actions, terrorizing this poor village in the lagoon layer to steal their Banandium gems. Void Kong is just such a punchable little vermin of a gremlin. However, his 2 compatriots are a lot more likable. Poppy Kong in particular is my favorite out of the trio. She really just gives off the vibe that she's sick of Void Kong's shenanigans and doesn't really care what happens. A highlight for me is this part of the junction after Void Kong leaves. You can talk to her and ask her to fight you, and she responds, "Absolutely not. I do not work overtime unless I'm paid to do so," which is just absolutely great. Entirely just in it for the paycheck, and I'm all here for it. Grumpy Kong is also pretty likable. He actually has a lot of honor. Whenever you beat him in a boss, he always is like, "You beat me fair and square. I have no choice but to let you progress. Go on." Or something to that effect. And both of these 2 characters end up quitting the company later on in the game, and they end up having a redemption arc, which is nice. Once Poppy Kong resigns, she ends up helping you, but neither Poppy nor Grumpy quitting stops Void Kong's ambitions, and he's still just a whiny, petulant brat till the end of the game. The Voidco trio are great villains that are far superior to the Brutals in Mario Odyssey, and I would honestly say they're the best villains the Donkey Kong franchise has had since, like, what, King K. Rool in the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, and I hope that we end up seeing them again in future titles. So those are all the major improvements that Donkey Kong Bananza has over Odyssey that I can think of, but that might beg the question, is there anything that Mario Odyssey does better than Bananza? I think there are a few things. Not a whole lot, but they do exist. First of all, I mentioned that Odyssey has 880 power moons to collect just from exploring the kingdoms, and the remainder of those you can buy from the shops. Donkey Kong Bananza also has this, where you can buy bananas for a certain amount of gold and Banandium chips. However, the difference here is that Super Mario Odyssey gives you the option to buy power moons in bulk, and Donkey Kong Bananza doesn't, meaning you have to purchase each Banandium gem one by one, which gets really annoying really fast. I understand that for the first 10 bananas you buy, the number of Banandium chips you need increases, but at a certain point it ends up capping at 100, so I don't see why you can't buy them in bulk after that. Really annoying, and I don't see why they didn't just bring the bulk option back from Odyssey. That seems like such a misstep. I already mentioned that I believe Super Mario Odyssey's boss quality is much more consistently good than Bananza's, but Bananza does have higher highs in terms of bosses, but I'll get to that later. And finally, I believe that Super Mario Odyssey has a better post-game than Bananza does, but I'll also get to that later. But for now, I would like to quickly touch upon Donkey Kong Bananza's overall presentation in terms of visuals and music. This shouldn't take too long, but knowing me, I'm probably gonna end up yapping on forever. Donkey Kong Bananza's art style has been pretty contentious since it was first revealed, and I myself have pretty mixed thoughts on it. Super Mario Odyssey went for a more realistic art style, which I am very fond of, whereas Donkey Kong Bananza goes for a more cartoony style, which I do think that fits Donkey Kong, but there are times in which I'm not the biggest fan of the art direction. Each layer in Bananza has its own unique visual style, and they look good from a distance, but I think it's when you take a closer inspection that the visuals get a little bit rough. I understand that with all of the destruction mechanics, you're gonna have to have as little geometry on these rocks as possible so it doesn't like chug along in its performance, but there are some points in which the rocks that you destroy look very low resolution. A lot of jagged edges, and looking at these rocks that you're destroying from close up doesn't exactly look too visually appealing. So what you're left with is this kind of like hodgepodge of different visual styles. The water looks hyper realistic, which I mean, Nintendo always nails the visuals on their water, but then a lot of the rocks and terrain have jagged edges which kind of clash with that, and then you have all of these cartoony different characters on screen as well, but then you have these skyboxes which can be pretty realistic, but then a lot of the times the visuals can be abstract abstract, I think is the word to use, which kind of does fit Bananza as a game. Like, the game is pretty weird, it is pretty abstract, it does a lot of really crazy, unique things, and while the art direction doesn't look bad, I think it's the conflicting art styles that I have an issue with. If the art direction of Bananza were to be more consistent, I think I would like it a lot more, because there are a lot of areas in Bananza that just look absolutely stunning. This majestic spiral of water flowing down in the lagoon layer, the radiant sunset lighting up the entire atmosphere of the canyon layer, this gorgeous and relaxing beach environment in the resort layer, and this visually striking view in the forbidden layer. These areas look really good, but then some just don't. It is just an inconsistency issue that I personally have. Super Mario Odyssey also had some inconsistency in its visuals, but most of the time that was relegated to like one-off area, like with the Luncheon Kingdom having a unique art style, which I did like. I also have an issue with some of the layers looking a bit too similar to other layers, like I mentioned earlier with the Freezer layer and the Radiance layer looking pretty similar, despite the fact that they're pretty much polar opposite in theming, but overall I think the game looks good most of the time. Now, I mentioned before I'm not a big fan of the new DK design. My thoughts on it change every single time it's used. Like, I hate it in the Mario movie, I don't think it looks that good in Mario Kart World, but I really like it in Donkey Kong Bananza. It's come out recently that apparently this new Donkey Kong design was made specifically for Bananza, and you can definitely tell that's the case. Bananza is the first time that this new DK design has been used where I actually think it's better than the old design would have been. Donkey Kong's facial expressions in this game are just so expressive, so much different personality that I couldn't really picture being on the old model. That being said, if we do end up getting a new Donkey Kong Country game, I still want the old design to return for that. But the visuals aren't the only aspect to the presentation, there's also the music to consider. On paper, you would think that the soundtrack of Donkey Kong Bananza would sound like a mixture of Super Mario Odyssey music and Donkey Kong Country music, which sounds absolutely amazing. However, in practice, the soundtrack sounds a lot more like Super Mario Odyssey than it does Donkey Kong Country, with a little bit of Zelda influence in there, I've noticed. The music that plays in the Tempest layer sounds like it was ripped directly out of a Zelda game. And while I wasn't expecting this soundtrack to be on par with something like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which to this day still stands as one of the greatest soundtracks in gaming history, I still think that I prefer Super Mario Odyssey's soundtrack to Bananza's. A lot of Bananza's OST doesn't really stand out too much to me compared to Odyssey. I think Odyssey had a lot more songs that I listened to on the regular, but that's not to say that Bananza doesn't have some key standouts in this regard. The music that plays in the canyon layer perfectly fits the area, and I absolutely love that lead guitar instrument, the it's so good, such an earworm. Canter Creamery in the Freezer layer has a really upbeat, catchy theme. The second challenge course theme is an absolute bop. And I think that the best music in all of Donkey Kong Bananza plays in the forest layer. The Beaky Thicket music is already really good. But then once you enter the Eggshell Hotel, you get a hotel arrangement of the theme. But once you dive into Moss Plume Marsh, that's when you get to listen to what is quite easily my favorite track in all of Donkey Kong Bananza, and the one that I think gets the closest to matching David Wise's excellence. It is just an absolutely beautiful song. In terms of performance, Donkey Kong Bananza runs at 1080p 60fps in handheld mode, while in docked it targets around 1080p to 1200p with dynamic resolution and all that, while hitting 60fps, both of which contain HDR. Bananza runs well for the most part, but there are a lot of points in which the frame rate just absolutely drops. The frame rate dips whenever there are a lot of particle effects on the screen. In some of the later bosses, the frame rate just gets utterly obliterated. This area in the Forbidden Layer where you can throw rocks to make these paths doesn't have a limit on how much you can throw, so if you throw enough, the game's performance just tanks. The technical and performance issues in Bananza aren't enough to ruin the game, however they are very noticeable. They're noticeable enough to the point where Nintendo, before the game even released, acknowledged the fact that the game featured a lot of performance issues. The most baffling part of Bananza's performance to me is the fact that almost all, if not all of these technical issues could have been entirely avoided if the game simply used DLSS, which it doesn't, instead opting to use FSR, which Nintendo Switch 1 games use. The Nintendo Switch 2 is fully capable of using DLSS. Several third-party games have already used it, which begs the question, why didn't Nintendo? The only explanation I could possibly come up with as to why Nintendo didn't use DLSS for Bananza is that Donkey Kong Bananza originally started off development as a Nintendo Switch 1 game, which I'm just trying to imagine this thing running on the Switch 1, but I could see maybe Nintendo was too far into development of the game to implement DLSS, which is highly unfortunate because, well, for the most part, when Bananza runs well, it runs really well, but when it doesn't run so well, it really doesn't run so well, and a lot of the performance issues, if not all of them, could have been solved through DLSS, which the game just doesn't use. Okay, before I dive into the story, ending, and post-game of Donkey Kong Bananza, I would like to quickly touch upon some stray thoughts that I have that don't really fit into the rest of the video. First are these bonus rooms that you can find scattered throughout the levels. They make for nice pace breakers, and they all follow the same formula where there are 3 bananas in each level, one of which is just in the middle of the level, almost impossible to miss. Another one is at the end as a reward for finishing the challenge, and then there's always one that's just hidden somewhere throughout the challenge area, and I like this. The best challenge rooms, however, and I think most people would agree on this, are the ones that are based off of levels from the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy. I really wish that there were more of these throwback challenge levels, as there are only 4 of them in the game. To be fair, they all feature the themes you would expect them to. You got your Jungle Hijinks level, your Bramble Scramble level, your Minecart Madness level, and there's even a challenge room based on the original Donkey Kong arcade game, which is really cool. And all of these challenge rooms feature brand new arrangements of these tracks that never play anywhere else in the game. But it still would have been nice to see more challenge areas in the same vein as these ones, like one based on Fear Factory, for instance. On top of these challenge levels, you also have battle challenges. These ones aren't as interesting. It's really just beat a bunch of enemies in the time limit, the end. Sometimes they can get creative with it, but most of the time it really just boils down to smack a bunch of guys for like 15 seconds. And the final type of bonus areas are these ones, where you just get boatloads of gold, and it destroys the frame rate at points. Another stray thought, Donkey Kong Bonanza got DLC, and I don't really plan on playing it because, well, I don't plan on getting it. From everything I've seen online, including anecdotes from people I know, it's really just not worth the price of admission. You get this full-scale replica of DK Island to explore, and there's not really anything here. No collectibles, nada. And also this side mode where you end up working with Void Kong, and apparently it's really fun. It's a roguelike mode, so there's that. So yeah, that's the stray thought. I'm not playing the DLC or covering it. My final stray thought is I've been thinking. So Donkey Kong Bonanza excels at exploration with the destruction mechanics, whereas Super Mario Odyssey excels more at the platforming aspect of things. And considering that Nintendo is now dipping their toes in making 3D platformers with characters that aren't Mario, I have an idea for a new 3D platformer. Hear me out here. A 3D platformer that combines Mario's platforming prowess with Donkey Kong's punching power. What character can do that? That's right, new Wario game, baby! Come on, it doesn't even need to be a sequel to Wario World or anything. It could be its own entirely unique thing. The entire game will be Wario breaking into places to collect as much gold and treasure as possible. The level design will combine both platforming sections, in which Wario will need to precariously platform his way along sections, while also containing Donkey Kong Bonanza's environmental destruction, but only on specific materials. It won't be the entire levels that are destructible. Combine all this with a more standard level-to-level format akin to Super Mario Galaxy, and bam, you got the best 3D platformer ever made. Get on it, Nintendo. So those are all my stray thoughts that I couldn't fit anywhere else in the video, and with that, it is now time to discuss Bonanza's story, finale, and post-game. So Nintendo's titles have never been focused on their story. Well, they're platformer games anyway. Other Nintendo franchises like Zelda or Xenoblade has a lot more intricate stories to them. But when it comes to something like Mario games, the story is almost always just Peach got kidnapped, now go save her, the end. And these stories aren't really anything more than just a device to get you into playing these levels. Now, these games have dipped their toes into story more intensively in the past, like with Super Mario Galaxy and the Rosalina storybooks, but in terms of the games themselves, the stories are all pretty basic. And at first, it seems as if Donkey Kong Bonanza is the same thing. The game literally starts off with, okay, Donkey Kong is monkey who like to eat banana. Island exists that contain lots of banana. Donkey Kong go to island to consume potassium. So Donkey Kong's on Ingot Isle. He's just rummaging around trying to find as much potassium as he possibly can, but then a purple rock falls from the sky while screaming. Donkey Kong goes to investigate and finds Odd Rock, a little creature who is scared of him at first, but then Donkey Kong saves it from a bunch of enemies, and DK ends up joining forces with it to work together. So they end up exploring the lagoon layer, then you get to the Bonanza rehearsal, and it turns out that the Odd Rock was actually Pauline. As a child, this was an immediate cause for concern for a lot of people upon its reveal. And to be fair, gamers nowadays have kind of just been conditioned into getting war flashbacks whenever they see that a game features a side character that talks. But I think most people have warmed up to Pauline as a side character, and she's definitely one of my favorite parts of this game. First of all, Pauline is the only character in the entire game that features full voice acting, which I think is perfect. They could have had no voice acting for Pauline at all, and that would have been entirely serviceable. But if you are going to add voice acting to Bonanza, it makes perfect sense why Pauline would be the only character to have it, as she's the only human character in the entire game. And all of the other characters just have their usual grunts and noises they make, akin to other 3D platformers. It helps a lot that I think that Pauline's voice actress does a good job. Pauline is constantly yapping the entire game, making remarks about what's going on in the environment around you, but she never gets annoying throughout any point of the duration of Bonanza. And the reason for this is because she is constantly endearing throughout the game. All of her reactions make perfect sense, and the voice acting is pretty good. And I have to give props here, because having a 13-year-old child on your shoulder the entire game who constantly yaps at every possible opportunity and having it not be annoying is quite a feat. There is this getaway mechanic where you can just build a house into a rock and sleep there to refill your health, and every time you do so, Pauline has a unique rant for every single getaway in the game. Now, the game does give you the option to skip these if you wish, but if you do so, I'm afraid you're weak and you won't survive the winter.
I wonder if there are any any banana-shaped fractones. Oh no. If there are, I better make sure DK doesn't eat them. Welcome, sir, to the Eggshell Hotel. That was my I work at the hotel voice. Was I convincing? To your right, please enjoy a scenic view of the world's largest natural waterfall of poison. And no stay at the Eggshell Hotel is complete without buying a souvenir bottle of all-natural poison. This idea seemed a lot smarter before I said it out loud. But the joke's on me. This thing is super rubbery. It can't be chomped. No more eating things off the ground for me. I'll leave that to you, DK. Do you ever dream about fruit, DK? Wait, better question. Do you ever not dream about fruit? Ha ah! Did you feel that rumbling? The thunder down here is intense. Wait, was that your stomach? Eesh, don't scare me like that. Ah! Again! Wait, are you sure you don't have a storm cloud in your belly? No, DK. I told you not to eat so many bananas. And now you have a tummy ache, don't you? DK, no more for you. I don't get it, DK. How do you tie this thing with those huge hands of yours? Their bodies are like rocks, so maybe they eat crystals or something? Well, I'd never eat a crystal down here. It might turn out to be someone's great-great-grandparent.
So this point in the lagoon layer is where the story is fully kicked into motion. Donkey Kong, he still wants bananas. But Pauline, she wants to get back to the surface to get back home. And there's a wrench thrown into this when the Kong Elder informs them that in order to get back home, they actually need to dive deeper down into the planet core, which rightfully confuses Pauline. But as it turns out, the planet core contains a thing called the Banandium root, which will grant any wish. So if Donkey Kong and Pauline can get there, then Pauline can wish to be brought back home, and DK can wish for bananas. And thus, the adventure to the planet core commences. Now, on their journey to the planet core, Pauline ends up receiving some character development. You see, Pauline has a huge penchant for singing, however she's nervous to sing in front of a large audience. And this poses a problem when all of the Bananza forms require singing in front of a large audience to activate. And you can witness Pauline's character development as the game progresses. When Pauline is introduced, she's so nervous to start singing that she literally throws a tantrum over it. But then you get to the end of the layer where you do your little celebratory victory dance, and Pauline is hesitant to do it at first, but she ends up getting into it by the end. Also, by the way, I think it's absolutely adorable how Pauline also pounds her chest here like DK does.
I can't believe I danced!
In the hilltop layer, the Fractones praise Pauline's singing talent, however Pauline rejects the offer to perform for them when asked. Every time you get a new Bananza ability, you can witness firsthand how Pauline gets less nervous each time. But then once you get the Snake Bananza, Pauline is comfortable enough with singing in front of an audience to the point where she's just like, oh yeah, let's do it. Pauline is a much more developed character in Donkey Kong Bananza than I would ever have expected from a 3D Nintendo platformer. And I think it's really interesting to see Pauline develop as a child before she became the superstar singer she is in Super Mario Odyssey. And the fact that Pauline consistently talks throughout the entire game actually is a benefit because it shows off more of her personality. In between each layer lies this section in which Pauline talks to you as you're diving down to the next layer. In the lagoon layer, you find out that Void Kong ended up kidnapping Pauline and turning her into a rock. And once you confront Void Kong in the junction, you find out that the reason why he kidnapped Pauline is because Pauline holds a secret special power that even she isn't privy to. Once the Radiance layer is completed, Pauline gets devoured by this giant eel, and then you have to play the entirety of the Groove layer without her. And it kind of feels lonely. No Pauline yapping on your shoulder, no Bananza abilities because it requires her singing to activate it, and also there is no monologue in the getaway. Then you find out that this eel was actually just possessed by Void Kong and he's really just a chill guy, and he gives you permission to jump inside of his mouth to save Pauline. You go inside to see that Pauline has been changed back into Odd Rocks. You have to save her, she becomes Pauline again, and then she tells you something.
DK, I've never told anyone this before, but I have this dream. Oh, maybe if we get to the surface, you and me, we can make it more than a dream.
As for what that dream is, we don't know quite yet, but we'll find out later. I think it's highly unfortunate that a lot of people, upon playing this game for the first time, will immediately resort to muting Pauline the second that she speaks, because genuinely, Pauline is one of my favorite additions to Donkey Kong Bananza, and I think that the game is better because she's in it. And not just because she's in it and she yaps or whatever, but also because of her character development as the story continues, as well as her role in the story. Now, you may be curious as to how this all fits into the DK timeline, because didn't Pauline get kidnapped by DK in the arcade game? And while I can't explain what's going on with Cranky Kong, I think I can explain how Pauline fits into the timeline here. Pauline mentions her grandma numerous times throughout the game, so my assumption is that the Pauline in Bananza and Odyssey is the granddaughter of the Pauline from the Donkey Kong arcade game, and that Donkey Kong in this game is the grandson of the Donkey Kong from the arcade game, and Cranky Kong, I just have no idea how Cranky Kong works at all. It is mentioned in one of the fossil descriptions that Donkey Kong's barrel throwing is passed down through generations. The only major wrench in this is the fact that in Super Mario Odyssey, Pauline actually states that she was kidnapped by an ape. Now, we can just assume that the ape in question is Void Kong and call it a day. However, once Mario gets the correct answer, she says, "I knew you'd remember." So, does that mean that Mario is Jumpman? Because that opens a whole new can of worms. Whatever, forget it. Alright, that's how I think this all fits into the DK timeline. So I think that about covers everything regarding Bananza's main plot and story, as well as Pauline's character development throughout the game. Now I want to cover the world building of Donkey Kong Bananza. All of Donkey Kong Bananza's layers truly feel as if they have been lived in for a long time. They're also full of life, and these inhabitants called the Fractones are all so charming. They all have these giant googly eyes that look like they were ripped directly out of a Rare game, and every time you punch them they just regenerate. And I think the best part of the Fractones is how they end up imitating all of the different characters that are around them. So in the forest layer they look like ostriches, in the Tempest layer they look like elephants, etc. It's just a really cute touch. Also, I mentioned earlier in this video that all of the different sub-layers in a layer feel like they are part of the same layer and not just separate areas. And the game takes advantage of this with examples like the lagoon layer, in which you'll drop water from the upper sub-layer to make the lower sub-layer have a higher water level to access new areas. The forest layer's atmosphere gets more oppressive the further down you go. They all just feel so interconnected, and they are interconnected too. There's a fast travel system in the game using this elevator, which will take you from one layer to the next, which also explains how the inhabitants of each layer are able to move around. On top of every layer in the game feeling lived in and interconnected, the game also has its fair share of lore, which I didn't expect. Almost every layer in Donkey Kong Bananza have these stone tablets lying around that tell you the history of the layer that you're in. Sometimes they're written by the inhabitants of the layer itself. In the forest layer, you can see the ostriches write about how they need to be hospitable to every last guest, and that since the ostriches are taller than them, they can't help but look down upon the guests. However, they need to make sure that every guest feels as if they are the tallest in the hotel. In the freezer layer, you can see some secret techniques they use to make the ice cream, and a whole lot of other stuff I'll let you discover on your own because I'm too lazy to say it all. But the main highlight of these tablets for me is the fact that there are some stone tablets throughout the entire game that tell a unique side story about this guy named the Exploratone trying to find out the origin of the Fractones. The Exploratone saga begins in the hilltop layer when he says that he is going to dive into the core of the planet to try to find the origin of the Fractones. And in every layer onward, you can find these stone tablets with blue and purple text in which they remark on their experience in each layer. Every single layer has some really unique dialogue, and there's a lot of effort that's put into something that a lot of people aren't even going to know is in the game. Hell, I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys watching right now might not even have known this was in the game, because so many people just blitz right past all of these stone tablets. A highlight for me is in the divide, in which the Exploratone can't figure out which way to go, so the solution that they come up with is to just spin in circles until dizzy, and then whatever way that they fall is the direction that they'll go, which is really funny. By around the end of the game, I was actually really invested to see how this story would end. I really wanted the Exploratone to find out the origins of them all. But then once you get to the forbidden layer, you find this stone tablet, and the ending isn't that satisfying. This time, we're certain that we have arrived at the origin of us, although there's no one here. We'd hoped we'd get to meet the original Fractones still living here, but nothing. It is a desolate place. Our saga ends here. We will have a look around for any stray clues. If we find none, we will head back home to the hilltop layer. Well, damn, that's an unsatisfying ending. I wanted to see what happened next. I was all invested in reading all these tablets and it ends like that. But for real, I really do like this overall saga of the Explorer tone. It's something they really did not need to add, but they did. It's something that most people playing the game won't even engage with or find at all. And that's a lot more dedication to the lore of a platforming monkey game than I would expect from Nintendo. I think my favorite piece of world building in Bananza is also the one that represents the world building in the game as a whole. So the entirety of Bananza takes place underground, and you may be asking the question, well, if the entire game takes place underground, then where's all this light coming from? Like, there are these giant suns in the sky, how are there suns underground? Now, the game could have simply just not answered this world building question and everyone would have been okay with it. However, the game actually puts the legwork in to explain this. So once you get to the Radiance layer, you discover this tribe of snakes that make these things called artificial suns. Basically, just giant light bulbs that are shaped as different objects that are so bright that they can light up the entire layer. And you get to witness this for yourself when you turn on this artificial sun, and you can see how this layer goes from being just pitch black to just as illuminated and bright as all the other layers are. And sure enough, if you go back to the previous layers that had a lot of light and you look at the sun, you can see that it's not a sun at all, but it's actually just an object that's emanating a lot of light. Like here in the canyon layer, the sun isn't actually a sun, it's a giant bunch of bananas. Absolutely spectacular world building that Nintendo in no way needed to put in the extra effort to add. Nobody would have cared if Bananza didn't explain how the light worked, but they still put the legwork in to do it anyway. This is so far above and beyond what even like Tears of the Kingdom does with this world building. Like seriously, Nintendo's justification for where all of the Sheikah technology ended up going to is the fact that it just disappeared. It just vanished. It went poof. I don't want to turn this into a massive side tangent, but I cannot get over the fact that Donkey Kong Bananza, the newest Donkey Kong game, has a more engaging story, plot, character development, world building, and even plot twists than the latest 3D Zelda game. It is insane that this is the timeline that we live in. But with that being said, I absolutely appreciate that Nintendo really put work into the story of this game as well as the world building and character development. And I hope that they continue down this road in the future. Alright, so I have now covered the story, characters, and world building in Donkey Kong Bananza up to the finale. So all that now remains to talk about regarding Donkey Kong Bananza is the finale and the post-game. And the finale of Donkey Kong Bananza is absolutely bananas. It is so bananas, in fact, that I'm actually going to issue my first ever spoiler warning right here. If you have yet to play Bananza for yourself and you don't want to have this awesome finale spoiled for you, then skip to the timestamp on the screen. The timestamp will also be in the description as well. And yes, this game's finale does in fact warrant a spoiler warning. If you have yet to play the game for yourself, you are going to want to experience this finale firsthand. And even though if you made it this far into the video, odds are you played the game for yourself already, I would still hate to be the one to spoil one of my favorite moments in all of gaming to you. So if you haven't played the game yet, skip to the timestamp on the screen. Alright? We're good? Okay, so at the end of the Forbidden Layer, you break through this wall and get to the final confrontation with Void Kong. Void Kong remarks about how the Banandium root is currently taking a nap, and the way to activate it, or well, wake it up, is through Pauline's special power, which turns out is her singing. This leads to a scene in which Pauline refuses to sing to wake up the Banandium root, which also provides a really nice logical justification as to why you can't use your Bananza forms in this boss, since all of the Bananza abilities also require Pauline singing to activate. So then you get this final boss fight against Void Kong, and it is pretty similar to the last fight you had against him. However, the sheer quantity of shenanigans that Void Kong throws at you has increased. They have increased so much, in fact, that the game actually struggles to run this fight. So after you give Void Kong a second spanking, he gets knocked out, but you're thinking in your mind, there has to be a phase 2 to this fight. No way would the main villain of this game get knocked out that easily. So DK and Pauline approach the Banandium root to make their wish, and as expected, Void Kong makes a move. A move which is a stroke of pure genius. You see, Void Kong voids up DK in the same way he did to Pauline at the beginning of the game. And this leaves Pauline in a predicament, because if she wants to save Donkey Kong, she'll have to sing for him. However, singing for him will also activate the Bananza root, which Void Kong can immediately use to his advantage. 200 IQ Galaxy Brain plays by Void Kong here. In the end, Pauline does decide to sing because getting DK back is more important to her in this moment than Void Kong not being able to access the Bananza root. And once DK is unvoided, as expected, Void Kong charges directly to the Bananza root. Although, through all of Void Kong's cunning and work he put in the entire game, there is one thing he failed to consider, and that is that the Bananza root here in the Forbidden Layer isn't actually the Bananza root. So as Void Kong jumps into what he believes is the Bananza root to get his wishes of greed and riches, it turns out that the Bananza root was actually fucking King K. Rool, who ends up punching him into orbit. Like, no, seriously, he punches him into orbit. Void Kong is never seen again for the rest of the game after this. Like, King K. Rool seriously just went game! It turns out that the Bananza root in the Forbidden Layer was actually King K. Rool's stomach, and him and his Kremlin crew have been trapped down here. And now that King K. Rool is free, he can get his hands on the actual Bananza root. This reveal is absolutely phenomenal and quite easily my favorite part of this entire game. King K. Rool was not shown off in any of the marketing material for this game. Nintendo were deliberate in not showing off King K. Rool at all at any point before the game released. That being said, before Bananza launched, there were a lot of people who were speculating that King K. Rool would make an appearance of some sort in the game. At the time, I thought all of those people were coping with the capital K, but turns out I was wrong. I never in a million years would have expected that Nintendo would not only add K. Rool to Bananza, but that he would be the final twist villain, and that would only be revealed at the end of the game, not in any of the marketing material or advertisements. Now, before we continue any further here, I want to mention that there has been some criticism regarding this final plot twist. The main one I see is that there wasn't really any foreshadowing for this, and that it was abrupt and came out of nowhere, but this assertion is just objectively false. There was ample foreshadowing throughout Bananza that King K. Rool would appear. First, there was a bunch of foreshadowing that just happened in the Forbidden Layer. Right before you enter the final boss fight with Void Kong, this fractone tells you about an intruder who broke in and never returned. That intruder was King K. Rool. Once you get a glimpse of the Bananza root in the Forbidden Layer, you can see that it has this small little circle on it. Now, throughout the game, there have been a multitude of Void Kong propaganda posters, and some of them depict the Bananza root, but none of these depictions of the Bananza root show this small little circle on it. But as it turns out, the reason why there was a small little circle on it is because it wasn't the Bananza root, it was King K. Rool's stomach, and that was his belly button. And even how the belly button looks on this close-up shot matches how K. Rool's belly button has looked before in his previous appearances, with the same sort of water droplet shape. Not only that, but this fake Bananza root is emanating green smoke or whatever. Why is it green? Because K. Rool. But that's all just foreshadowing that happened in the last 10 minutes. What about throughout the rest of the game? Well, as I mentioned, people were speculating that King K. Rool would be in Bananza before the game even released, and the reason for this is because several of the enemies in Donkey Kong Bananza are skeletal versions of crocodiles. So the speculation was that these were actually the Kremlings the entire time. And as it turns out, that assertion was entirely true. And it's not just the skeleton crocodiles either. All of the enemies are skeletal versions of the Kremlings from the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy. And the final piece of foreshadowing is something I've yet to touch upon. In every single layer of Donkey Kong Bananza, you can find Cranky Kong somewhere within, and every time you talk to him, he'll give you a long rant about how they make these levels too darn deep nowadays, or whatever, and then he'll give you a Bananza gem. Now, at first I took issue with the fact that it seemed like every single Cranky Kong rant were near identical to each other. There are times in which he repeats the exact same words verbatim, and I was kinda disappointed that he didn't have a unique rant every time. But as it turns out, Cranky Kong having a really similar rant every time was intentional. Because you see, every Cranky Kong rant is different from one another, but only at the end. At the end of every Cranky Kong rant, he will proceed to detail a banana bandit that he's chasing after. And the game's clever here because every single detail that Cranky Kong mentions applies to Void Kong, so you'll most likely just assume that he's referring to him. But as it turns out, the banana bandit that Cranky Kong is referring to here is not Void Kong, but King K. Rool, because every detail he mentions applies double to him. And the thing that makes this go from being pretty clever to sheer brilliance is the fact that the game knows that most people are going to skip through all of the dialogue because of how similar it all is, and because of that, miss key foreshadowing at the end. Also, King K. Rool being trapped here works from a meta perspective as well, because it explains why he hadn't made an appearance in mainline Donkey Kong for like 26 years before this point. So no, King K. Rool's reveal didn't just come out of nowhere, no matter how much it seems like it did. It was foreshadowed throughout the entire game. But the other criticism I see is that this entirely sidelines Void Kong as a villain, which I can understand to an extent. However, Void Kong was still fully developed. He still did have a presence as a villain. He was a really damn good villain as well, and you did still at least get a final boss fight against him. I think it makes perfect sense for Void Kong to be shafted at the end of the game. Think of it this way: Void Kong is in charge of a company, and that company's goal was to dig into the center of the planet to get resources. However, it turns out that the entire time, King K. Rool and his Kremlin crew already got there before him, and there is a really good argument to be made that Void Kong wouldn't have gotten anywhere near the Banandium route or the planet core if it weren't for the work that King K. Rool and the Kremlin crew put in before him. And I think there's probably a pretty good real-world analogy here, something about the pirates putting in all the work and then the company ends up taking it and using it. Personally, I think that this entire moment, this whole scene is perfect, absolutely flawless, and that Void Kong deserved no better end than to be punched into the void and become null and void. So then, you chase after King K. Rool to the next layer, you get this hard-ass loading screen artwork of King K. Rool, and then you make it to the planet core. The planet core is the true final level of Donkey Kong Bananza, and yet again, it wasn't shown off in any of the promotional material. Something I want to quickly mention that I don't see a lot of people talking about before I discuss the planet core as a layer itself, is that I think one of the main reasons why people don't think that there's going to be any more layers after the Forbidden Layer is because the Forbidden Layer is layer number 15, and that's a nice round number, so most people aren't going to expect there to be a 16th layer. But lo and behold, here we are in the Kremlin Courtyard, which has that K alliteration that I really like coming back. The first thing that you'll see upon entering this layer is this giant statue of King K. Rool. After that, you'll be greeted by these two fractones, one of which is literally missing a chunk of their head. Like, these fractones regenerate. What did the Kremlin crew do to them to make their head just explode and not regenerate? The other fractone attempts to speak to you, but struggles a lot because they mention that they haven't used speech in a long time because they've been trapped down here. And speaking of the Kremlin crew, you can find the critters in this layer as well. The critters making a comeback is already great, but on top of that, they still make the exact same noises when defeated that they did in the original Donkey Kong Country. Something that's quite easy to miss in this sublayer is this stone tablet right here, detailing the diary of a Kremlin crew member. In said diary, the Kremlin crew member writes that they all jumped down the sinkhole when ordered, but King K. Rool got seized by the Banandium root behind them and stuck in the hole, and that they're terrible afeard of what punishments are in store for us when the dread King K. Rool is free once again. So then you take this minecart and crash right through the ground in this absolutely awesome shot to get to the next sublayer, the Fractone Fort. Another alliteration, but it doesn't use K's this time. This sublayer is just a chill area before you go even deeper into the planet core, but I think the main highlight here is this stone tablet. Turns out the Exploratone saga actually does have a happy ending after all. Exploratone exclaims that they found the planet core, the origin of us, and that the fractones down here do not seem to be capable of speech, but they will still work to be able to communicate. So you take another minecart, break through the ground again, and make it to Neki Skyway. And this sublayer is named as such because look, it's the Nekis! These enemies were the Nekis all along, and they also make the sounds that they did in Donkey Kong Country. After that, you go to the next sublayer, Claptrap Crossing, and I think you can start to see a theme here. That every single sublayer in the planet core introduces a new Kremling, and that all of the enemies you fought throughout the entire game were actually Kremlings the whole time. In this case, these enemies from the forest layer were actually the claptraps. The outer shell looks like a crocodile now, but if you look closely, you'll actually notice that there is a real claptrap inside of it. Next, we make our way down to Critter Crevice. Not a whole lot to say here since we already know that the critters are back, so let's just head on to the next sub-layer, Kremling Camp. The Kremling Camp sees the return of the Zingers. Turns out that these enemies that throw stuff at you were Zingers the entire time. And the Kremling Camp also has this mini-boss against K Stomping Clomper. This mini-boss feels really out of place. It doesn't even have any of the K rule or Kremling theming to it. It's literally just Stomping Clomper but with a K at the beginning. Anyway, after Stomping Clomper, again, you head down to the next sub-layer, the Fractone Cradle. I'm guessing that now that the Fractones are more proficient in speech, they have grown to just be anti-alliteration in all forms. Again, the highlight of this sub-layer is that we get the conclusion of the saga of the Exploratone. The Exploratone says that they told all of the other Fractones about their adventures, and that they're gonna start a new thriving village down here in the planet core, and that, quote, "This will be a new origin of us." Now that is an actually satisfying conclusion to this. So then we tread further into the planet core and the music really starts to pick up. The music in the planet core gets more intense through every sub-layer, but here's where you really start to notice. And the music picks up for a reason because we're heading into the Kremling Quagmire. The entire ground here is made up of thorns and you're expected to turf surf across it. Also in this sub-layer we see the return of two more Kremlings, Kaboom and Army. Army was actually these armadillo enemies from the freezer layer, which further enforces how these skeletal Kremlings from throughout the game was actually just really good foreshadowing. Because once you replay the game, you'll get to the freezer layer and you'll be like, oh, of course that enemy was Army. I will say though, I wish that after you unlock the planet core, whenever you go back to the previous layers, all the enemies would be the Kremlings, but they're not. You go back to the previous layers, they're still all skeletons, and that's pretty unfortunate. After turf surfing through the Kremling Quagmire, you make it to the Kremling Coliseum. This area is a final enemy gauntlet against the Kremlings that also serves as a nice showcase of all of them, because it's entirely possible and likely that there were a few Kremlings that you missed and didn't notice beforehand. But since they're all in this battle arena and you need to beat all of them in order to progress, you are forced into seeing all of the different Kremlings, which I think is cool. So after everything we've been through, all of the planet core that we've explored and progressed through, we make it to the final sub-layer of the planet core, Climactic Cliff. Turns out that the Fractones have warmed up to alliteration, which is nice, just as long as it doesn't involve a K anywhere. You find this stone tablet here that says, "Here lies Exploratone," and that gets you really scared, like, oh no, what happened to the Exploratone? And it turns out after you dig down that the Exploratone is literally just lying there, which is really funny. Overall, the planet core is one of my favorite layers in all of Donkey Kong Bonanza. I think it makes for a much better final layer than the Forbidden layer does. The atmosphere here is on point, bringing the Kremlings back is awesome, and at its core, it makes for a good set of final challenges before you face the final boss. I also like that all the fossils here are based off of barrels and the items from the Donkey Kong arcade game, as well as having like a full 8-bit DK fossil, which is really cool. Just a fantastic final layer. So then you take one final minecart ride into the core of the planet core, the Heart of Gold, where we fight King K. Rool to stop him from getting his claws on the Bananza root and end this for good. So then, all that remains is the final showdown against King K. Rool, who has his back turned to Donkey Kong, aura farming out the wazoo. Then, he harnesses the power of the Bananza root, and the final boss of Donkey Kong Bonanza commences. Now, this is a solid enough boss fight, but you would think for the final boss of the entire game that it would be a little bit more difficult than it actually is. K. Rool whips out his classic abilities like the blunderbuss that shoots cannonballs at you that he had in Donkey Kong Country 2, and using the Kong Bananza, you can charge punch these big cannonballs back at him, which is something I've noticed a lot of people who play this game for the first time don't realize, despite the fact that you literally needed to do that to get here. So the strategy for this boss fight is pretty simple. Whip out the Kong Bananza to punch the cannonballs back at K. Rool. Occasionally, he'll attempt to vacuum you up, and when he does that, you want to use the Elephant Bananza to throw a chunk into it to clog it up. So after several rounds of following this process of using the Elephant Bananza to suck up all of the rot, and using the Kong Bananza to punch the cannonballs back at him so you can keep punching him when he's down, you eventually end up knocking out King K. Rool. Again, this isn't a bad boss fight by any means, but for the final boss of the game, you'd expect it to be a little bit more complex and challenging. Once you nail the pattern down, that's about it. King K. Rool just dies after that. It's a solid enough boss fight, but for the final boss of the game, you'd expect it to do a little bit more. So with King K. Rool defeated, Donkey Kong and Pauline approach the Bananza route to make their wishes. And wait a minute, why is the stuff shop here? Whatever. So then, Pauline wishes to get back home, and Donkey Kong wishes for bananas. And then the Bananza route ends up granting both of their wishes, but in a kind of unorthodox way, sending both of them towards the surface on a giant pillar of bananas. However, it sends them in the exact opposite direction that they came in from. And at a certain point, it seems as if they're both gonna end up crashing. But alas, the Bananza route paves the way, and both Pauline and Donkey Kong are gonna make it to the surface. And with that, that is all of Donkey Kong Bananza. That's the full game. Tonight we are victorious! Well, would you look at that? Turns out Donkey Kong Bananza had less developers than Expedition 33. Shout out to everyone involved in the production of the game for making it possible. I'm talking about Kaboing, Cackle, Cannon, King Zing, Clamp On, Clank, Clasp, Cleaver, Clinger, Cloak, Clobber, Clomp, Clubba, Clump, Naka, and Cobble. All of you, shout out to you all. Thank you. Okay, but for real though, I was hoping that they would bring back the fake credits, and I am beyond glad that they actually did. So then, King K. Rool ends up waking right back up, and then flies up to where Donkey Kong and Pauline are using his propeller pack from Donkey Kong Country 3. The second phase of this final boss isn't exactly too hard, but it is absolutely hype. Basically, you need to take chunks off of this platform to throw at K. Rool before he can attack you, and occasionally he'll remove a chunk of your platform, making the area you have to stand on smaller. And all of this is happening over this hard-ass arrangement of Gangplank Galleon. And this arrangement also includes a segment from Crocodile Cacophony as well. Eventually, this banana lift does end up taking Donkey Kong and Pauline to the surface. However, King K. Rool ends up flying up there first. However, since we're going in the exact opposite direction from where we came, that begs the question, where exactly are we going to end up here? That's right, the location on the surface you end up getting sent to is none other than New Donk City, which not only confirms that Mario Odyssey and Bananza take place on the same planet, but it's also just a perfect place to send you. Pauline states that this is her city, which makes sense that she would live there and grow up there, considering that she ends up becoming the mayor. And finally, New Donk City makes for a perfect set piece for the final phase of the final boss of Donkey Kong Bananza. So DK and Pauline look around to find King K. Rool and see him on top of a building on his supervillain shit. Like seriously, he even has a whole villain monologue here. Then he uses the power of the Bananza route to take over the entirety of New Donk City. And then he floods all of New Donk City with lava. And now, I don't have a single clue how everyone managed to survive this, despite the fact that we literally see inhabitants of New Donk City standing out in the open earlier. My current headcanon is that immediately after seeing King K. Rool, every last inhabitant of New Donk City ended up running into one of those like secret bonus challenge levels from Mario Odyssey that were located inside of the buildings and would take you to like a completely different location in the void. Yeah, that's where all the New Donk City residents currently are. So anyway, the lava is still rising up to like the top of the buildings, and there's a giant King K. Rool statue of lava too, I guess. And just like that, King K. Rool has taken New Donk City. At the starting point, you can look around and find all sorts of references to Donkey Kong's history, which I think is really cool. Most people won't stand around to notice all of this, so I want to mention it here. This entire New Donk City sequence is just absolutely bananas. Like seriously, no, pause right here. Pause right here. Could you imagine if Donkey Kong Bananza leaked beforehand and the only image that leaked was this screenshot? What would people make of that? Anyway, hitting the play button, you have to use all of your different Bananza forms to get through this giant obstacle course in New Donk City. A little detail I like here is the fact that as you scale up the building, you can see how many meters high you are. A nice little reference to the original arcade game. This section makes use of almost all of your Bananza forms. You use the ostrich to fly over these gusts of wind. You use the elephant to inhale all of this rot. You use the zebra to run along these paths. And you use the Kong Bananza to break your way up these buildings. This section is really intense and fun. You're constantly like punching balls to knock over all these Kremlings like bowling. Nice! You're avoiding these giant King K. Rool walls that fall on top of you. And you're doing all of this while the lava is continuously rising up. Such a cool final platforming section before the final boss. Both in its theming, being New Donk City taken over by King K. Rool with his iconography and branding everywhere, but also in its gameplay, forcing you to utilize several mechanics and Bananza forms you use throughout the game. And all of this leads to a giant boxing ring, just like Donkey Kong 64, where we fight the final phase of King K. Rool. You broke through my Kremlin crew. No surprise, your beat is strong. However, I've got my own beat. I've got the Banandium root, and when it comes to rot, I rule! I'm rotten to my core. Now I'll turn you into Banandium mush and eat a meal fit for a king! Donkey Kong Bananza is truly the Elden Ring of Monkey. So it turns out that King K. Rool has his own Bananza powers, and he uses them to turn himself into K. Rool, King of Rot. And I'm sorry, you cannot tell me that isn't the name ripped directly out of a FromSoft game. Anyway, this is the real final boss. King K. Rool pulls out all of the stops. This final phase against K. Rool, King of Rot, is here to ascertain whether or not you've upgraded your skill tree enough, as well as your efficiency in using all of the various Bananza abilities. And every last Bananza ability has its use in this battle. The Kong Bananza is used to punch back all of these cannonballs that King K. Rool shoots out of his blunderbuss, just like the first phase. And then once King K. Rool is knocked out by these giant cannonballs, you can then use the Zebra Bananza to run to him quickly while he's still stunned. The Elephant Bananza is extremely useful here, being used to inhale all of this rot on the battlefield. And the Snake Bananza can be used for the Glare ability, which slows down time, which can also be really helpful here. And while the Ostrich Bananza is the least useful out of all of these for this fight, it can still be combined with the Snake Bananza to jump really high with the snake and then glide with the ostrich to avoid attacks. However, the main two that you really need no matter what is the Kong Bananza to punch back the cannonballs and the Elephant Bananza to inhale all of this rot. And believe you me, there is a ton of rot. K. Rool isn't called the King of Rot here for nothing. No, he floods the entire battlefield with rot, which not only obliterates the game's frame rate, but also will obliterate you if you're not careful. This battle starts off pretty similar to the first phase. K. Rool at first is using the exact same attacks that he did in the first phase, shooting cannonballs at you, filling the battlefield with rot, etc. But then he starts to change it up a little bit. As the battle progresses, K. Rool mixes up how he shoots the cannonballs at you. It starts off with him just shooting them at you in a straight line on the ground like usual, but then eventually the cannonballs will start bouncing towards you, which makes them harder to hit. And then finally he'll shoot them in this like swirly pattern, which is absolutely diabolical, really challenging to hit. Also, K. Rool mixing up how he shoots these cannonballs is exactly what he did in Donkey Kong Country 2 as well, which is a nice touch. But the main attack that K. Rool does here that you will really need to look out for is this one right here, where he shoots a bunch of different cannonballs that eventually explode, filling the entirety of the battlefield with rot. Like genuinely the full surface area of this arena gets caked in this stuff. Whenever you punch one of these cannonballs before they explode, they end up leaving a trail of gold behind. And this gold here is the key, because while the entire battlefield does fill up with rot, if you punch one of these cannonballs and stand on even a single chunk of gold, the rot cannot hit you and you are entirely impervious to it. Then from there you can simply switch to the Elephant Bananza to clean up as much of the area around you as you can. However, you don't exactly get a whole lot of time to do this because there are a bunch of giant hands of rot coming after you. Now at first it seems like there's literally no way to avoid this. However, if you use the Elephant Bananza to throw chunks of gold at these hands, the hands turn into gold and fall down. And this is part of the reason why this boss fight is so incredible, because no matter how overwhelming this boss fight may seem, the more you play, the more you learn. There are several different tactics you can figure out to make this boss fight a lot easier. As I mentioned, this part where the battlefield is entirely filled with rot seems intimidating at first. However, if you punch even a single cannonball and stand on even a single chunk of gold, you're good. And from there, these rot hands can be immediately taken down with even just a single chunk of gold being thrown at it. There's this section here where K. Rool constantly comes out of the ground to throw these smaller rot hands at you, and at first it may seem as if your only option is to wait for him to finish this. However, if you use the Elephant Bananza to throw a chunk of gold at him while he's doing this, it'll immediately knock him out of doing it. When King K. Rool consistently changes up how he shoots these cannonballs at you, it can be pretty tricky to hit them at him. However, if you use the Elephant Bananza, you can throw a chunk right at these cannonballs before they even have a chance to get out of the blunderbuss. A lot of these little strategies are ones that maybe even you as the viewer watching this right now didn't realize you could do, but that's precisely why this boss fight is so phenomenal, because this boss seems to be exceedingly challenging and intense at first. However, once you start to break it down and you figure out how everything works and you come up with these new strategies, the game rewards you for coming up with new, innovative, creative ideas for beating K. Rool's ass. Now, I've seen some people say that this boss is just a damage sponge, and I can guarantee you the only reason why some people are saying that is because they didn't even realize that you can punch these big cannonballs back at him. And how do you expect to figure out all these minute strategies when you can't even figure out the basics of the boss design? So then, after all of this, you chase down King K. Rool when he's stunned, he throws these gold hands at you, you punch through them, and you punch him into orbit in the exact same manner that he did to Void Kong. Absolute bonanza. Now, I didn't even think King K. Rool would be in the game in the first place, but even if I knew beforehand that K. Rool was in Bonanza, I would never in a million years have expected Nintendo to handle him so well, because literally everything about King K. Rool in Donkey Kong Bonanza is perfection. From how he was revealed, not being in any of the marketing material whatsoever, and then showing up as the twist villain in the end of the game with all the foreshadowing from throughout the game, to how you then need to follow him to the planet core and everything regarding the planet core with the Kremlings coming back and everything, down to this absolutely asinine final boss, which is also just perfect. How it starts off with what you would expect from like a final boss against Bowser or whatever in a 3D Mario game, to then hitting you with this final triumphant scene in which Pauline and DK go to the surface, and then hitting you with the fake credits again coming back, which is then followed by the fake The End screen as well, which leads into the second phase with this extremely hard arrangement of Gangplank Galleon playing, where you have to like ride this banana gold pillar thing to get to the surface while throwing chunks at King K. Rool while he's using his helicopter thing from DKC3. Then of all places on the surface to get shot to, you get shot to New Donk City, and then the mad lad King K. Rool takes over the entire city with his branding and iconography, and then you have this chase sequence where you use your Bananza Forms to get through this entire gauntlet, which then culminates in this final Elden Ring ass boss against King K. Rool in the boxing ring like Donkey Kong 64. And this boss fight might literally be the best boss fight that Nintendo has ever made. Okay, well, in their 3D platformers at least. I know of some Zelda bosses I prefer more, but like still, this is probably the best boss they've ever made in a 3D platformer. And then you punch him into orbit just like he did to Void Kong earlier. But on top of how well King K. Rool is implemented into the game, his characterization is on point too. They could have very, very easily fallen into the trap of just making K. Rool a green Bowser like Wart or whatever. But no, Nintendo understood why King K. Rool is such a beloved villain, giving him his own personality. He's all wild and wacky, way more insane than Bowser is. And I'm pretty sure this is the first time King K. Rool has ever spoke, at least in any of the mainline titles, and his dialogue is exactly what you would expect King K. Rool to be saying. The way that K. Rool was implemented, utilized, and characterized in Donkey Kong Bonanza is perfect. and I have to give credit where it's due. So with King K. Rool clobbered, all of the lava and rot that infested New Donk City has been turned into gold. All of the citizens of New Donk City are somehow still alive. I'm telling you, they went into the alternate dimensions inside of the buildings from Odyssey. I just can't prove it. And Pauline managed to make it to the surface. Pauline tells DK that the dream she has that she mentioned earlier is to sing for everyone in New Donk City, which, as we're well aware, she ends up fulfilling, as we can see in Super Mario Odyssey. Also, now it makes sense why Pauline holds these big festivals in New Donk City to honor Donkey Kong, because DK kind of just single-handedly saved the entirety of New Donk City from the single biggest terrorist attack in the city's history. Also, K. Rool has a sign in New Donk City, which is kind of morbidly comedic. So after Pauline tells DK about her dream, she asks if DK wants to join her on the dream, and DK initially agrees. However, DK partaking in Pauline's dream to sing for the entirety of New Donk City kinda stops him from achieving his dream of bananas. So Pauline tells him he needs to make his dreams come true, and that he shouldn't worry because she can keep the beat on her own. So then Pauline says she'll see him around. She gives him a fist bump. This shot holds on for a while. Then DK starts running. Pauline waves goodbye with a tear in her eye, and the music swells as DK jumps and punches down, and that is the end of Donkey Kong Bananza. What a fantastic ending. And then we get to the post game and alright, I'll talk about the post-game really quick. So Donkey Kong Bananza is a phenomenal game. However, I have outlined some issues I have with it. And I would say the biggest issue I have with Donkey Kong Bananza is its lackluster post-game, which is really disappointing. I mentioned that I think Super Mario Odyssey has a superior post-game to Bananza earlier when I was making the comparisons to Odyssey. And I don't even think Odyssey's post-game is anything too spectacular or anything. You unlock the Mushroom Kingdom, which is a really cool new area. You unlock the Dark Side of the Moon, which I don't really like because it entirely consists of hint art, harder variations of challenge areas you've already played, and these rematches against the Brutals, which are really tedious now because you have the space physics to contend with. And once you obtain enough power moons, you unlock the Darker Side of the Moon, which is a really good final challenge level. Again, not a spectacular post-game or anything, but still quite a lot of meat to chew on after beating the main game. And if I'm gonna be honest, I think the Mushroom Kingdom from Odyssey is better than anything that Bananza's post-game does. Donkey Kong Bananza's post-game immediately starts off on a low note. Right after you beat the game and you get to the really fantastic ending and you sit through the credits and let everything just process, you get this screen that says the adventure continues with Pauline playing music in New Donk City. And then the game throws you directly into this 3 months later screen in which you start the post-game. Immediately, I do not think starting the post-game automatically after you finish the main game is a good idea, because it really just grinds the momentum of the ending to a halt, and you don't really get any time to process that insane final boss and the ending. Instead of throwing you directly into the post-game upon the credits completion, it should have had the adventure continue screen pop up and then give you a little message saying that there's more content to play, and then send you to the title screen. Then when you want to start the post-game, you can just reload your file and it'll bring you right to it. That would have been way better than how it currently plays out, because how it currently plays out is you're going to get to the final boss and the ending and you're going to be riding that high, and then you get to the credits, maybe even crying during the credits, and after the credits are done, immediately it's like, oh, 3 months later, what's this? Also, this ending of DK and Pauline parting ways loses almost all of its emotional impact when you end up reuniting with Pauline in the post-game right after. Seriously, the post-game starts in the same way that the base game did. Donkey Kong in the middle of the Ingot Isle cave-in smelling bananas, and then he goes to go get them. It turns out in the Ingot Isle cave-in there's now a huge gold rush happening because of everything that DK did. And then after exploring for like 5 minutes, you immediately reunite with Pauline. Now, I like that you reunite with Pauline, but this post-game happening right after the credits and then reuniting with Pauline right after gets rid of all of that weight of the ending sequence. So that's the first issue with the post-game. Anyway, Pauline tells DK that she's going to be performing in New Donk City and she needs to come up with a song. And in order to come up with a new song, she needs to meet with all of the different elders from throughout the game. Upon meeting each elder, you'll need to do a Bananza rehearsal, which is pretty much a final test for all of your Bananza abilities. And each one has a certain amount of bananas you need to collect before being able to enter it. And I will give the post-game this. I really like the approach of not gating any of your progress with bananas in the main game, but then doing so in the post game. I think that's way better than needing to collect a certain amount of bananas to get to each layer. However, I'm not the biggest fan of any of these Bananza rehearsals. The Kong rehearsal is pretty tedious. Most of it just consists of defeating all of these enemies. The zebra rehearsal is a little better, giving you these timer challenges where you need to get to the end in a certain amount of time. But then the ostrich rehearsal just kind of sucks. Like, it's not terrible or anything, but getting all the bananas certainly is. For the other rehearsals, knowing the general area of where the bananas are isn't that bad because of the fact that the game tells you where they are in order. But in the ostrich rehearsal, the bananas aren't sequential because it's a giant open area with different branching paths and there is no straight line to the end. In the other rehearsals, when you're missing a banana, you can at least know the general vicinity of where the banana is going to be. In the ostrich rehearsal, when you're missing a banana, good luck finding that. Then you get to the elephant rehearsal, which is more puzzle focused. Some admittedly clever puzzles here, however, this entire thing is just so tedious and time consuming. It just takes forever to complete. Then finally you get to the snake rehearsal, which ironically enough might actually be my favorite out of all these Bananza rehearsals, which I would have never expected considering the fact that the snake Bananza is my least favorite Bananza form in the game. But like, the challenges are well designed and fun, it makes good use of all the different snake abilities, the level design is really vertical, which fits nice with the snake, which moves really slowly when jumping forward but really fast when jumping upwards. So I mean, hey, like, it's decent. So yeah, not really a big fan of the Bananza rehearsals, but there is more to the post game than just that. There are some new bananas sprinkled throughout the layers, but most of them are just these like costume ones where you have to wear a certain costume and talk to this guy, and it's just so lame having to change your costume, talk to the guy, and then change your costume for the next guy. It's just not interesting in the slightest. And then you get to the final challenge level inside of the giant eel, the Great Harmonial's Windpipe. I'm gonna be honest with you, this is an utterly pathetic final challenge level. Quite easily the easiest of the final challenge levels that Nintendo has made for these games. Like, Champion's Road is a final challenge level. The Perfect Run is a final challenge level. Badge Marathon is a final challenge level. The Great Harmonial's Windpipe feels like they stitched a bunch of unused challenge rooms together and just called it a day. Like, it's not a bad level by any means, but it in no way feels like the final challenge of the game. Once I finished it, I thought for sure it was going to be a fake out like Mario Wonder did, where it's going to show you the actual final challenge level right after, but it never did. This is the final challenge of Donkey Kong Bananza. Darker Side was an infinitely better final level than this could ever dream of being. Finishing this final level gives Pauline the inspiration she needs to finish writing this song, and then we go to the surface to watch her perform it. And I was here thinking, oh my god, is there going to be a cutscene of this happening? That would be awesome. But nope. Nope. All you get is this illustration right here. Genuinely, this is no better than the postcard from Mario Sunshine. The post-game of Donkey Kong Bananza is immensely disappointing and quite easily my least favorite part of the entire game. And it's highly unfortunate that it has to come after what is quite easily my favorite part of the entire game, being that entire finale sequence. Going from the phenomenal finale and ending of Donkey Kong Bananza to the post-game is like climbing up a mountain and falling down the other end. Disappointing post-game aside, Donkey Kong Bananza is a phenomenal game. Almost everything it does extremely well, and it does a lot of things I wouldn't have expected from a 3D Donkey Kong game. Just the fact that it's a 3D Donkey Kong game at all is unexpected. After the massive success of Super Mario Odyssey, both critically and commercially, I absolutely would have expected that the next 3D platformer Nintendo made would be a sequel to it. I didn't expect that it would instead be a 3D Donkey Kong game, let alone one of the premier titles for their new console. It gives me hope that they might start tapping into their other franchises more, whether it be IP that don't receive as many new games or franchises that have long been dormant. I mentioned earlier that a 3D platformer starring Wario that combines DK's punching power with Mario's platforming prowess would be really good, and that might actually be a thing that releases in the future. The emphasis that Bananza has on its story is also highly unexpected. I was more invested in the story of this 13-year-old girl and monkey journeying to the planet's core to make a wish and get back to the surface than a lot of Nintendo's recent story-heavy releases, and the game puts in a lot of legwork to establish world building and give Pauline character development. I'm sure literally nobody would care if the story of Bananza was more simple like Odyssey's was, but they still went above and beyond to make likable, dynamic characters with an engaging plot and actual plot twists. And I hope future Nintendo games also have this same emphasis on their stories. The skill tree is an ingenious addition to the game which gives you incentive to collect bananas, which fixes the biggest issue I had with Odyssey. The environmental destruction is satisfying from the moment you start the game and push Y in the opening area all the way to the end and never loses its luster. And Bananza isn't afraid to be weird, unique, and creative. This is going to sound really hyper-specific, and that's because it is, but Donkey Kong Bananza feels as if Rareware made a 3D Donkey Kong game for the GameCube and Nintendo remade it for the Switch 2. Yet again, Donkey Kong proves himself among gaming's all-time greats. From the original Donkey Kong arcade game, which revolutionized gaming at the time, to Donkey Kong Country, which was the first time that new silicon graphics were used at such a large scale in gaming, to Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze, which truly showed what 2D platformers are capable of, and now Donkey Kong Bananza, utilizing full voxel technology for a 3D collectathon which will go down as one of the best games Nintendo has ever made. Like, seriously, Donkey Kong? You get to have the best 2D platformer of all time and now the best 3D platformer of all time? Are you kidding? Overall, I give Donkey Kong Bananza a 9.5 out of 10. Had the post-game not been so disappointing, had some of the layers not been as uninteresting, had the bosses been of a consistently higher quality, and had the game used DLSS to alleviate its performance issues, I would easily give it a perfect score. If you want to get extremely hyper-specific, my score for the game is more like a 9.8 out of 10. As it stands, Donkey Kong Bananza is a phenomenal game, and it is quite easily my favorite game of 2025. It is pure potassium.
We're breaking through, down to the core. No stopping us, not anymore. Inside the storm, I found the key. Your beat sprang up, my voice has been released. Hear it call, it's whispering truth. This melody in harmony will strike a chord that's gonna break us free.
So those are all my thoughts on Donkey Kong Bananza. It's been a while since I made an Avert radar, hasn't it? How long has it been again? It's been like, it's been over 2 years. Time isn't real. Nope, time is not in fact real. I cannot believe it has been almost 2 years since my last Avert radar episode. Over 2 years since I've started the channel, and probably even more surprising than that is the fact that I still haven't changed my setup in the slightest. I'm still using the exact dresser. I'm looking at it right now. The same exact dresser that I used to put my phone onto to record that I did at the very beginning of my YouTube channel. And I thought by now for sure I would find a better way to do this, but nope. Still nothing on that wall, but whatever. I don't want to make this outro too long because for some reason I have a really strong urge to start punching everything in my house to find collectibles. I broke a door a couple days ago because I thought I'd find a few Bananium chips in there. I didn't. But you cannot tell me there's not a Bananium gem behind that wall right there. This big open wall, you cannot prove to me that there is no Bananium gems behind there. If I break that wall down right now, if I punch through there, there's gonna be a Bananium gem in there. You gotta believe me, I just can't prove it. I need to punch through that wall to see if there's collectibles in there. Well, anyway, that's going to be about it for me today. If you enjoyed the video, maybe consider subscribing if you want. You can give me money if you want. I have a Patreon account. Or you can do none of those things if you want. I have other Avert Radar episodes, of which right now there are only 2. I have one video on F-Zero 99 and one on Mario Wonder. Both of those videos are ones that I was really proud of when I first put them out, but as of right now, even though I still think they've held up pretty well, the audio quality leaves a lot to be desired. It was before I knew how to do noise reduction on Audacity, so you could hear my computer fan just whirring in the background like vroom, and it kind of gets a little annoying, but you know, still worth checking out if you enjoyed this video. They're both Nintendo reviews just like this one. I might extend Avert Radar in the future out to doing more than just Nintendo games. I might do other games that aren't Nintendo. I might do movies even, TV shows. Sky's the limit really, but yeah. Yeah, I think that's about it. Still not the best at doing outros 2 years later, go figure, but yeah. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, week, month, and year, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye, everyone.